The treaty world of Vesol was a jewel made of glass, light, and hypocrisy. It floated in the comfortable gravity well of a binary star system, a sprawling metropolis constructed entirely around a single, inexplicable anomaly. The city itself was a masterpiece of galactic concord architecture, featuring spiraling towers that defied physics and boulevards paved with crushed gemstones that chimed underfoot. Every species in the known galaxy had an embassy here, and every embassy competed to outshine its neighbors in opulence and pretense. But at the center of the glittering city, effectively swallowing the light of the two suns, stood the Obelisk. It rose from the middle of a perfect, spherical crater, a monolith of absolute black stone that was taller than the highest government spire. It had no seams, no texture, and no reflection. It simply existed, a void in the landscape. Ringing its massive circumference were hovering glyphs of hard light, ancient symbols that drifted like lazy fish in an aquarium. Scholars had spent 400 years trying to translate them. They had failed for 400 years. The obelisk was the heart of the Concord, the sacred relic that supposedly legitimized the union of 1,000 worlds. Yet it was as communicative as a grave. Lyra Vare stood on the observation balcony of the High Council spire, watching the glyphs cycle through their endless, nonsensical loop. She took a sip of nectar that cost more than a transport ship and felt the familiar, heavy exhaustion settling behind her eyes. Lyra was the Concord's youngest envoy, a title that carried immense weight and very little actual power. She was a native of the Vare Protectorate, a species known for their height, their pale bioluminescent skin, and their terrifying capacity for deductive reasoning. She was elegant in the way a scalpel was elegant. Her silver robes were draped with mathematical precision, and her eyes, wide and completely black, reflected the city lights without revealing a shred of her internal thoughts. She was infamous in the diplomatic circles for her smile. It was a small, polite expression that usually appeared 3 seconds before she dismantled a rival's career with a single, irrefutable sentence. But privately, Lyra was tired. She was tired of the performative morality of the council. She was tired of the way High Curator Soren Kale looked at the obelisk like it was a mirror. Most of all, she was tired of babysitting. Her comms bead chimed against the bone behind her ear. Envoy Vare, the voice of her assistant, buzzed. The delegation from Earth has docked. Security is processing them now. The High Curator requests you meet them at the ring. She emphasized that you are to ensure they remain containment compliant. Lyra sighed, the sound barely audible over the wind. Earth, the nuisance species. They were loud, biologically fragile, and technologically scrambling to catch up to civilizations that had been warping space while humanity was still figuring out bronze. I am on my way, Lyra said. She set the expensive glass on the railing, uncaring if it fell, and turned her back on the silent obelisk. The docking ring was a chaotic sensory overload of methane breathers, ammonia mist, and the clanging of magnetic clamps. Elias Rook stood in the middle of it, clutching a satchel that had seen better decades, trying very hard not to look like he wanted to dismantle the gravity plating under his boots just to see how it worked. Elias was Earth's diplomat support specialist. It was a fancy title for a man who was half engineer, half historian, and fully regretful of his life choices. He was 32 years old, with messy dark hair that refused to obey military regulations and eyes the color of old coffee. He wore the gray dress uniform of the United Earth Coalition, which looked stiff and uncomfortable compared to the flowing silks and organic armors of the alien crowds pressing around him. He was not the ambassador. The ambassador, a red-faced man named Harrow, was currently screaming at a customs drone about the humidity. Elias had been selected for this mission because his psychological profile listed him as harmless and exceptionally calm under pressure. In reality, he just processed panic internally, usually by calculating structural load limits. He adjusted the universal translator hooked over his ear. It was a bulky, retrograde piece of Earth tech that hissed with static every time someone spoke too quickly. A shadow fell over him. The crowd parted, not out of respect, but out of a sudden, instinctive need to be elsewhere. Elias looked up, and up. The alien woman standing before him was nearly 7 feet tall, slender as a willow branch, and radiating an aura of chilling composure. Her skin was the color of moonlight on snow, faint patterns of light pulsing beneath the surface in rhythm with a heartbeat he could not hear. Her eyes were abyssal voids. Elias blinked. He knew who this was. Lyra Vare, the envoy. The one the briefing dossier had described as razor-sharp and socially lethal. Lyra looked down at the human. He looked disheveled. He looked tired. He looked like he had been assembled from spare parts. "Greetings," Lyra said, her voice melodic and cool. "I trust your transit through the jump gates did not liquefy too many of your internal organs. It is a common complaint among your species." Elias tapped his translator. It shrieked a high-pitched feedback loop before settling down. He smiled, a crooked, genuine expression that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "The organs are fine," Elias said, though my ego took a beating when the docking computer asked if our ship was a waste disposal unit. Lyra tilted her head. It was a bird-like movement. "The computer is automated," she said. "It values efficiency. Your vessel is shaped like a brick. It's a sturdy brick." Elias defended. Lyra stepped closer, the crowd giving them a wide berth. "I am Envoy Lyra Vare. I have been assigned to facilitate your presence here, which is a polite way of saying I am here to make sure you do not touch anything valuable, break any treaties, or embarrass the Concord by dying of a common cold during the ceremony." Elias adjusted his collar. He looked at her, really looked at her, and forgot for a second that he was standing on a hostile planet. "Well," Elias said, glancing at the translator which was flashing red, "I promised to try my best. The briefing said you were formidable, but it left out the part where you look like the starlight caught in a diamond." He froze. The translator hissed. Lyra stared at him. Her expression did not change, but the bioluminescent patterns on her neck flared briefly, a brighter shade of blue. Elias frantically tapped the device. "I did not say that. I mean, I did. But I didn't mean to say it out loud. I meant to say you look commanding. Formal. The device, it glitched." Lyra raised an eyebrow, a gesture that managed to convey volumes of skepticism. "Your language device is either broken," she said, her voice dry as desert sand, or very optimistic. Elias flushed. "Broken. Definitely broken. It's Earth tech. We're still working out the bugs on syntax interpretation." Lyra turned on her heel, her silver robe swirling like liquid mercury. "Follow me, Specialist Rook, and perhaps keep your observations regarding my appearance to yourself. The High Curator is waiting, and she does not appreciate poetry from the lower species." The High Curator, Soren Kale, was waiting in a private viewing sanctum overlooking the Obelisk Plaza. Soren was a member of the founding species, a humanoid with skin like polished bronze and hair that floated in a personal gravity field, drifting around her head like a golden halo. She was beautiful, ancient, and terrifying. She sat on a throne made of white coral, watching the screens that displayed the security grid of the entire city. When Lyra and Elias entered, Soren did not turn around. "The Earth delegation is late," Soren said. Her voice sounded like grinding stones. "Ambassador Harrow is detained at customs," Lyra said smoothly. "Specialist Rook is here to coordinate the technical aspects of the ceremony." Soren spun her chair around. Her eyes were vertical slits of burning orange. She looked at Elias as if he were a stain on the carpet. "Technical aspects," Soren repeated. "There are no technical aspects. Human. You are here to witness. You are here to sign the resource treaty that grants the Concord mining rights to your system's asteroid belt in exchange for our protection. You are here to be grateful." Elias held his ground, though his palms were sweating. "With all due respect, High Curator, the treaty specifies joint operation, not full concession." Soren stood up. She was taller than Lyra, looming over the room like a storm front. "The treaty specifies what I say it specifies. Earth is a danger to itself. You are children playing with fusion drives. The Obelisk judges the worthy, and it has remained silent for your kind because you are insignificant. Today, you will stand where we tell you. You will sign what we give you, and you will leave." She turned her gaze to Lyra. "Envoy Vare, keep this one close, too close. I want him seen. I want the galaxy to see the primitive standing next to the Concord's finest. It creates a useful contrast. If he wanders, if he speaks out of turn, if he so much as breathes on a dignitary, I will hold you personally responsible." "Understood," Lyra said, her voice void of emotion. Soren waved a hand, dismissing them. "Get him out of my sight. The ceremony begins in 1 hour." As they walked out of the sanctum and into the wide, glass-walled corridors of the embassy wing, Elias let out a breath he felt he had been holding for 10 minutes. "She seems nice," Elias muttered. "She controls the orbital defense grid," Lyra said, walking briskly. "She could vaporize your home continent with a voice command. I would advise against sarcasm." "It's a coping mechanism," Elias said. He glanced out the window at the plaza below. The crowds were gathering, thousands of species, a sea of color and movement, but his eyes snagged on something else. "Wait," Elias said, stopping. Lyra paused, looking back. "What is it?" Elias pressed his face to the glass. "Down there, near the base of the obelisk." "I see maintenance drones," Lyra said. Elias narrowed his eyes. He was an engineer. He knew what maintenance looked like. Maintenance was messy. It was disorganized. This was precise. "That's not maintenance," Elias said. "Look at the formation. They're placing emitters. And those barriers, they aren't crowd control. They're harmonic dampeners. Why would you need dampeners around a rock that hasn't made a sound in 1,000 years?" Lyra stepped back to the window. Her gaze sharpened. She saw what he meant. A ring of heavy industrial-grade machinery was being concealed beneath the floral arrangements and ceremonial banners. It looked like a stage was being built under the stage. "High Curator Soren manages the obelisk preservation," Lyra said slowly. "Perhaps it is a new protocol. Or," Elias said, his voice dropping, "it's a setup. If you wanted to make sure a ceremony looked impressive, maybe you wouldn't leave it up to chance. Maybe you'd rig the lighting." Lyra looked at him, and for the first time, there was no mockery in her eyes. "Calculation, yes, but not mockery." "You are suggesting the High Curator is faking a divine sign?" Lyra asked. "I'm suggesting that in my experience, politicians prefer guarantees over miracles," Elias replied. Lyra stared at the scene below for a long moment. Then she grabbed Elias's arm. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "Come," she said. "We are going to the plaza, and you are going to stay exactly 3 centimeters from my shadow." If you are right, this day is going to be dangerous. If you are wrong, it will merely be humiliating. I am not sure which I prefer. The Plaza of the Ascendant was a cauldron of noise and heat. 3 suns' worth of light beat down on the white stone, magnified by the shimmering force fields that kept the atmosphere breathable for the oxygen-dependent species. The obelisk loomed in the center, a dark tear in the fabric of the bright world. Up close, it was terrifying. It was so black that Elias's eyes couldn't focus on the surface. It felt like looking into a deep ocean trench. The ceremony was in full swing. Ambassador Harrow, sweating profusely in his dress uniform, was standing on a raised dais, being berated by a multi-limbed counselor who was speaking so fast the translators sounded like a swarm of angry bees. Elias stood off to the side, corralled behind a velvet rope. Lyra stood next to him, a statue of cool indifference, though her eyes were scanning the crowd, the security perimeter, and the strange humps of machinery hidden under the flowers. "We are here to civilize you," the counselor bellowed, his voice amplified across the plaza. "To save you from your own primitive instincts. Earth demands resources yet offers nothing but instability." The crowd laughed. It was an ugly, rattling sound that rippled through thousands of throats. Ambassador Harrow turned redder. "We offer cooperation. We offer innovation. You offer debris," the counselor shouted. Soren Kale watched from a high balcony, a small smile playing on her lips. She snapped her fingers. 2 guards in heavy, radiant armor stepped forward and shoved Elias. "Move." One of them grunted. Elias stumbled. "Hey, symbolic witness," the guard said. "Get on the stage." They pushed him past the velvet rope, thrusting him into the harsh spotlight of the dais. He was suddenly the center of attention, millions of eyes, physical and digital, fixed on him. He felt small. He felt like a prop in a play he hadn't rehearsed. "Look at them," the counselor sneered, pointing a claw at Elias. "Even their technicians look like refugees. Weak, unprepared. Is this the species we are asked to embrace?" The laughter grew louder. It was a physical weight, pressing down on him. Elias looked for Lyra. She was stepping forward, her face hard. Lyra moved to the edge of the dais, ignoring the guards. She leaned in close to Elias, her voice a soft thread of steel cutting through the noise. "Breathe," she whispered. "If you faint, they'll frame it as a cultural confession." Elias looked at her. Her nearness was dizzying. She smelled of ozone and cold rain. It rattled him more than the jeering crowd. "I'm not going to faint," Elias whispered back, his voice trembling slightly. "I'm just really hating this party." The counselor stepped toward Elias, raising a staff topped with a glowing gem. "Kneel, human. Kneel before the obelisk and beg for the Concord's mercy." Elias gritted his teeth. He looked at Harrow, who was defeated. He looked at Soren, who was gloating. He looked at the hidden machines humming with a frequency that made his teeth ache. "No," Elias said. "It wasn't a shout. It was just a fact." The counselor swung the staff, a threatening gesture meant to cow him. Elias flinched. It was a reflex. He stepped back to avoid the blow. His heel caught on the uneven stone. He stumbled backward. Behind him was the obelisk. Elias threw his hand out to catch his balance. "Don't touch it." Lyra's voice cracked the air, sharp with sudden, inexplicable terror. But it was too late. Elias's palm slapped against the surface of the black stone. He expected it to feel like cold rock. He expected it to feel like polished glass. Instead, it felt like grabbing a live wire made of ice. There was no sound of impact. There was no thud. There was only a sudden, absolute silence that swallowed the entire plaza. The jeering crowd went mute. The wind stopped. The hum of the hidden machines cut out. For one heartbeat, nothing happened. Elias stood there, his hand pressed against the impossible blackness, his eyes wide. Then, the obelisk woke up. It didn't glow. It didn't shine. It ignited. Deep beneath the surface, glyphs flared into existence, burning with a light that was not white or gold, but a violet so dark it hurt to look at. They rushed toward Elias's hand like iron filings to a magnet. A shock wave of pressure ripped outward. It wasn't wind. It was a psychic hammer blow. Every universal translator in the plaza sparked and died instantly. The feedback screech was cut short as thousands of devices fused into useless plastic. Elias tried to pull his hand away, but he couldn't. He was stuck. The stone was warm now, pulsing like flesh. He gasped, his vision swimming with geometric shapes that shouldn't exist. And then, the voice came. It didn't come through his ears. It didn't come through the air. It blossomed directly in the center of his brain. A voice that sounded like shifting tectonic plates and falling stars. It was clean. It was ancient. It was undeniable. And everyone in the plaza heard it. It bypassed language, bypassed biology, bypassed the dead translators. It spoke to the mind. The obelisk stayed silent for centuries until the human touched it. The words hung in the psychic air, heavy and absolute. Elias screamed, but no sound came out. The energy surged up his arm. He watched in horror as a thin ring of dark light formed around his wrist, searing into his skin like a brand. It wasn't a burn. It was a bond. It looked like a bracelet made of night. The connection severed as quickly as it had begun. The obelisk released him. Elias staggered back, clutching his wrist. His eyes were wide, the pupils blown, reflecting moving symbols that were still dancing across his vision. The silence broke. Chaos erupted. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated panic. Counselors were screaming in languages no one could understand anymore because the translators were dead. Security drones hovered confusedly, their logic circuits fried by the pulse. On the balcony, Soren Kale was gripping the railing so hard the metal bent. She wasn't screaming. She wasn't running. She was staring at Elias. Her gaze was ravenous. It wasn't fear. It was hunger. "Contain him!" Soren roared, her voice natural and raw without amplification. "Seize the human. He has contaminated the relic." The radiant guards snapped out of their stupor. They lowered their spears, advancing on Elias. Elias couldn't move. His legs felt like water. His mind was still echoing with the voice. Until the human touched it. What did that mean? Why him? He saw the spear tip coming toward his chest. Then a shadow swept over him. Lyra moved faster than human eyes could track. She didn't draw a weapon. She didn't need to. She stepped between Elias and the guards, her silver robes flaring. She grabbed Elias, not by the hand, but by the front of his cheap gray suit jacket. She yanked him forward, pulling him into her personal space, into her shadow. "Back!" Lyra commanded. Her voice was ice and iron. The guards hesitated. She was an envoy. Touching her was an act of war against the Ver Protectorate. "He is under arrest." The guards snarled in broken common tongue. Lyra looked him in the eye. She lied with the perfect, terrifying calm of a woman who had ended governments over dinner. "He is under envoy protection," she declared. "By the laws of the Concord, he is my charge. Touch him, and you declare war on my house." It was a bluff, a massive, treasonous bluff. There was no law that protected a human who had just accosted a sacred deity. But the hesitation was all she needed. "Run!" she hissed in Elias's ear. She spun him around, shoving him toward the service access door behind the dais, the same door the maintenance crews had used. Elias stumbled, his feet finding traction. He ran. Lyra was right beside him, her long strides eating up the distance. They burst through the door just as a plasma bolt scorched the stone where Elias had been standing. They were in the service corridors. It was dark here, cool and smelling of ozone and grease. The walls were lined with pipes and conduits. "Left!" Lyra shouted, grabbing his shoulder and steering him down a narrow ramp. Elias was gasping for air. What? What just happened? "My wrist, it burns. Keep moving or I will leave you here to be vivisected," Lyra snapped. Her humor had turned vicious, a shield against the panic that was undoubtedly clawing at her own throat. They sprinted past startled maintenance workers who pressed themselves against the walls. The alarms began to blare, a rhythmic, deafening hooting sound. Elias's head was pounding. The obelisk wasn't done with him. He could still feel it. It was like a radio station playing in the back of his skull. Images were flashing through his mind, overlaid on the dark corridor. He saw star routes, not the ones on the Concord maps. These were different, older. He saw civilizations burning. He saw a door made of black glass that only opened when a hand with 5 fingers and a specific genetic resonance touched it. "I see them," Elias gasped, stumbling. "I see. Maps." "Hallucinations are a common side effect of almost dying," Lyra said, dragging him around a corner. "Focus on your feet." "No," Elias insisted. He slammed into a wall as they took a sharp turn. "It's talking to me. It's still talking to me. It's showing me a way out." Lyra stopped. They were at a junction. 3 corridors stretched out. "Which way?" she demanded. "Security will be sealing the sector in 30 seconds. Elias closed his eyes. The pulse on his wrist throbbed. He felt a pull, like a magnet in his chest, tugging him toward the center tunnel. "That one," Elias said, pointing. "It feels open." Lyra didn't argue. She didn't ask how he knew. She grabbed his arm and hauled him down the center passage. They ran until their lungs burned. The sounds of pursuit, heavy boots, shouting voices echoed behind them, getting louder. They burst into a large maintenance bay filled with drone parts and hydraulic lifts. Lyra slapped the control panel on the door, locking it. Heavy blast shutters slammed down, sealing them in. But almost immediately, a red light began to flash above the door. "Override initiated," a mechanical voice droned. "Access granted in 10 seconds. "They're cutting through," Lyra said. She scanned the room. There was no other exit. It was a dead end. "We're trapped," Elias said. He leaned against a crate, sliding down until he hit the floor. He cradled his wrist. The black ring was pulsing with a soft, dark light. It matched the rhythm of his own heart. But then it sped up. It was beating faster than his heart. It was beating for him. Lyra stood over him, her chest heaving, her perfect composure finally cracking. She looked at the door, then at Elias. "This was a mistake," Lyra whispered. "I should have let them take you." Elias looked up at her. His eyes were terrified, but the brown irises were flecked with strange violet sparks. "Why didn't you?" Elias asked. Lyra looked at the mark on his wrist. She looked at the way the shadows in the room seemed to bend toward him. "Because," she said, drawing a small, sleek energy pistol from the folds of her robe, "I have a terrible feeling that you are the only interesting thing that has happened in this city in 500 years. The blast door groaned, metal buckled, sparks showered down. Elias looked at his wrist. The mark flared bright, casting long, distorted shadows against the walls. The voice in his head grew louder. Not words this time, but a sensation. Expectation. Waiting. The door began to rise. Lyra leveled her weapon. Elias scrambled to his feet, the engineer in him looking for a tool, a weapon, anything. But all he had was the mark, and the sinking, terrifying realization that the obelisk hadn't just touched him. It had chosen him. and it wasn't going to let him go. The blast door groaned, the metal screeching as the hydraulic locks disengaged. A sliver of light from the corridor widened at the bottom, revealing the boots of the security team. Lyra Vare did not panic. Panic was inefficient. Instead, she jammed a stolen encryption key into the exposed port of a heavy-lifting drone sitting dormant in the corner of the maintenance bay. "Get on," she ordered. Elias Rook looked at the drone. It was essentially a floating slab of flat, scarred metal designed to haul crate-sized capacitors. It had no seats, no railings, and looked about as aerodynamic as a tombstone. "That is a cargo sled," Elias said, his voice rising an octave. "It is designed for boxes. I am not a box. You are approximately the mass of a Class 4 waste container," Lyra said, her fingers flying across a holographic interface that projected from her wrist. "Get on, or get shot." Elias scrambled onto the cold metal plate just as the blast door rose high enough to admit a squad of armored enforcers. He gripped the edges of the sled until his knuckles turned white. Lyra vaulted onto the sled behind him. She didn't sit. She crouched like a predator, one hand gripping a rusted handle, the other tapping the final command. "Hold your breath," she said. "Why would I?" The sled accelerated from 0 to 100 kilometers an hour in under 2 seconds. Elias did not scream, mostly because the air was forcibly ejected from his lungs. The sled shot forward, not toward the open door where the guards were raising their weapons, but straight up the vertical maintenance shaft that the drone was programmed to service. Plasma bolts sizzled against the wall below them, boiling the paint. The G-force pressed Elias flat against the metal. The world became a blur of gray conduit pipes and flashing warning lights. "I think I swallowed my tongue," Elias yelled over the roar of the repulsor engine. Lyra ignored him. She was steering the sled with subtle shifts of her body weight and rapid commands to the drone's navigational brain. They rocketed up through the bowels of the city, bypassing the security checkpoints that were currently locking down the lower levels. "We are exiting in the diplomatic tier," Lyra shouted over the wind. "Do not look at anyone. Do not speak. And for the love of the void, do not touch anything with that hand." Elias looked at his left hand. The black ring around his wrist was pulsing, a slow, rhythmic throb that felt less like a bruise and more like a second heart. He tucked it against his chest. The sled lurched, banking hard to the right, and shot out of a service vent into the open air. Suddenly, the claustrophobia of the tunnels was replaced by the vertigo of the skyline. They were hundreds of stories up. The city of Vaysol glittered below them, a canyon of crystal spires and floating walkways. The wind whipped Elias's hair into his eyes. Lyra killed the engine. The sled drifted silently onto a private landing terrace that jutted out from a needle-thin tower made of white glass. She stepped off the sled before it had even fully settled, her movements fluid and terrifyingly composed. "Inside," she said. Elias rolled off the sled, his legs wobbling. He followed her through a sliding glass door into her embassy suite. The room was aggressive in its minimalism. The floor was polished white stone. The walls were transparent smart glass that offered a 300-degree view of the panic spreading through the city below. There was a single low table, a few hovering chairs that looked uncomfortable, and absolutely nowhere to hide. Elias leaned against a wall, trying to stop the room from spinning. "Nice place," he wheezed. "Very sterile." "Do you sleep here or just recharge in a docking station?" Lyra was already moving around the room, passing a handheld scanner over the surfaces. "I do not sleep when I am being hunted by my own government," she said. She tapped a panel on the wall, and the transparent glass turned opaque, cutting off the view of the city. The room bathed in a soft, artificial twilight. Elias slid down the wall to sit on the floor. He held up his wrist. The mark was glowing faintly, casting a violet sheen on the white floor. "It is a map," Elias said quietly. Lyra stopped scanning. She turned to look at him. "Explain." Elias rubbed his temples. "When I touched it, it wasn't just a voice. It was a download. Imagine someone took the entire internet and shoved it into your brain through a straw. But it wasn't data. It was memories." "Memories of what?" Lyra asked, stepping closer but keeping a careful distance. "Of the network," Elias said. He traced a line on the floor with his finger, and for a second, a phantom trail of light followed his skin before fading. "There are pathways. Star routes that don't exist on any chart, and there are doors, thousands of them, all locked, all waiting." He looked up at her, his eyes dark and serious. "And there is a pull. It feels like gravity, but sideways. It wants me to go down." Beneath the crater, Lyra's expression tightened. "Beneath the crater is the foundation of the city. It is solid bedrock. There is nothing there." "There is something," Elias insisted. "The obelisk isn't just a monument. Lyra, it's an antenna. And I think I just turned the receiver on." Lyra walked to the wet bar, a sleek slab of marble, and poured 2 glasses of water. She handed one to Elias. Her hand did not tremble, but her eyes were hard. "You need to understand where you are." "Elias," she said, "the Galactic Concord is not a government. It is a holding company. We trade in stability. We trade in the illusion that there is order in the chaos." She took a sip, looking at the opaque wall as if she could see through it. "The obelisk is the logo of that company," she continued. "It is valuable because it is mysterious. It implies a higher power that sanctions our rule. If it wakes up, if it starts talking, the mystery dies. And if the mystery dies, the fear dies. And without fear, the Concord fractures." Elias drank the water. It tasted like metallic mint. "So Soren wants to kill me to keep the logo shiny?" "Soren wants to kill you because you are a variable she cannot control," Lyra said. "And Soren Kale is a woman who would burn a solar system to maintain a spreadsheet." As if on cue, the wall screen flickered to life. It was an override broadcast. Soren's face filled the room. She looked magnificent and terrible, her bronze skin glowing under the studio lights, her golden hair floating in its personal gravity field. "Citizens of the Concord," Soren said, her voice grave and maternal. "A tragedy has occurred. An Earth technician, likely suffering from a neurodegenerative plague common to his species, has violated the sanctity of the obelisk. He is a biological contaminant." Elias scoffed. "A plague? I had a physical last week. My cholesterol was slightly high, that's it," Soren continued. "For the safety of all species, this individual must be contained. We demand that Envoy Lyra Vare surrender the contaminant immediately. If she refuses, she will be considered compromised by the pathogen and treated as a hostile entity." The screen went black. Lyra stared at the blank wall. "Compromised," she repeated. "She is efficient. She just stripped my diplomatic immunity in 3 sentences." "What do we do?" Elias asked. He stood up, the water glass shaking in his hand. "We can't stay here." "No," Lyra said. "We cannot. But we cannot leave without eyes." She tapped her comms bead. "Jax, wake up." A moment later, a holographic projection sizzled into existence in the center of the room. It was a small, chaotic figure, a Yulton, a species that looked like a cross between a red panda and a gargoyle, wearing a leather flight jacket covered in grease stains. Jax was sitting in a chair that was too big for him, surrounded by floating screens. "Lyra!" the hologram shouted. You are on every channel. You look terrible. Did you do something to your hair? Jax, Lyra said, her voice cutting through his noise. I need a route out of the embassy district, and I need to know what Soren is actually doing, not what she is saying on the news. Jax spun in his chair. Oh, I know what she is doing. She is moving the Third Fleet into low orbit, and she just authorized a kinetic strike package. Kinetic strike? Elias asked. On who? On you, buddy, Jax said, pointing a furry finger at Elias. Well, on the embassy. My navigation AI says you have a statistical survival rate of 4%. A synthetic voice, smooth and cheerful, piped up from Jax's console. Correct. I have compiled a playlist of soothing ambient noise to accompany your inevitable disintegration. Would you like to hear it? Delete the playlist, Lyra snapped, or I will come there and throw your processor out an airlock. The AI made a sound that resembled a disappointed sigh. Jax, Lyra said, focus. Soren called him a contaminant. She is building a narrative. I need proof that this was planned. Jax's claws flew across his holographic keyboard. Way ahead of you, boss. I'm scrubbing the Concord secure servers. Soren's encryption is sloppy. It's all pomp, no math. He paused, his large ears twitching. Whoa, what? Lyra asked. Here, Jax said. He flicked his wrist, and a document floated into the air between Lyra and Elias. It was a requisition order, dated 3 weeks ago, authorized by High Curator Kale. Jax read, deployment of harmonic dampeners, deployment of staged media assets, and here it is, a drafted press release regarding the unfortunate Earth insurrection. Elias stepped closer to the hologram. She wrote the speech before I even touched the rock. She was going to frame your ambassador, Lyra realized. She was going to goad him into an outburst. Claim Earth was unstable, and use it as an excuse to seize your system's resources. You touching the obelisk just accelerated her timeline. She is going to bomb the embassy and blame it on my contagion, Elias said. Yes, Lyra said, which means we have approximately 10 minutes before this room becomes a crater. She turned to Elias. The suite was small, and in her pacing she had moved into his personal space. She stopped. Elias didn't back away. The air between them suddenly felt thick, charged with static. It wasn't just the danger, it was something else. Lyra looked down at his wrist. The black ring was flaring again, but this time, it wasn't pulsing randomly. It was reaching. The violet light seemed to stretch toward Lyra's hand. She hesitated, curiosity warred with survival instinct. She lifted her hand, bringing it slowly toward his wrist. She didn't touch him. She hovered her palm a few inches away from his skin. Elias's breath hitched. The mark hummed. It was a sound they could feel in their teeth. The violet light intensified, arcing across the gap between them like a miniature lightning storm, connecting Lyra's pale skin to Elias's marked wrist. Elias's pulse spiked. He could feel it hammering in his throat. Lyra froze. Her eyes, usually so guarded, went wide. She could feel it too. A resonance, a vibration that traveled up her arm and settled in her chest. It felt like standing next to a massive speaker, but the music was made of pure intent. It responds to you, Elias whispered. Lyra pulled her hand back sharply. The arc broke. The light dimmed. The room felt suddenly cold again. Proximity, Lyra said, her voice sounding slightly breathless. It is not just a biological interface. It is looking for something compatible. Elias rubbed his wrist. The skin felt hot. Or maybe that was just him. We need to go, Lyra said, turning away, her movements jerky. Jax, send the route to my retinal display. Done. Jack said. Take the Undercity. Soren's drones don't like the magnetic interference down there. Plus, it smells like fried algae, so the bioscanners get confused. Good, Lyra said. She grabbed a heavy cloak from a hook by the door and threw it at Elias. Put this on. If anyone sees your face, we are dead. If anyone sees your wrist, we are worse than dead. The Undercity of Vaysol was the architectural opposite of the glittering spires above. It was a sprawling, chaotic web of suspension bridges, floating markets, and unauthorized gravity wells hanging beneath the main city ring. It smelled of ozone, spice, and exhaust. The lighting was a headache-inducing neon riot of pinks and greens. Lyra moved through the crowd like a knife cutting through water. She wore a hooded cowl, her height disguised by a slouch that looked practiced. Elias struggled to keep up, his cloak flapping around his ankles. The market was packed. Species from the outer rim bartered for scrap tech, illegal gene mods, and hallucinogenic nebula gas. Gravity here was loose, every few meters. Elias felt his stomach lurch as the plating shifted, making him feel weightless for a second before slamming him back down. Keep your head down, Lyra hissed, gripping his elbow to steer him away from a patrol of hovering enforcement drones. Where are we going? Elias asked, trying not to stare at a vendor selling what looked like pickled eyeballs. There is an access shaft in the Sector 4 scrapyard, Lyra said. It leads to the foundational struts. If your pull is real, that is the closest we can get to the root of the obelisk. They turned a corner into a narrow alleyway lined with hanging tapestries. Suddenly, a gate blocked their path. It was a heavy, rusted iron lattice, locked with a complex electronic seal. Lyra cursed softly. This was not locked yesterday. Soren must have updated the perimeter protocols. She reached into her robes for her decoder tool. Elias looked at the gate. He didn't see iron. He saw a pattern. Lines of light, invisible to everyone else, were flowing through the metal. He saw the knot where the energy tied itself together to hold the lock. Let me, Elias said. Lyra looked at him. You are a historian. Rook, you cannot pick a quantum lock. I don't need to pick it, Elias said. He felt strange. He felt like he was sleepwalking. He reached out. He didn't touch the lock. He didn't touch the gate. He just held his hand up, palm facing the metal. The mark on his wrist pulsed. Open, Elias thought. It wasn't a command. It was a request. The gate didn't just unlock. It shuddered. The rust flaked off as the metal groaned, the molecular bonds temporarily softening. The lock mechanism dissolved into gray dust, and the gate swung inward. Lyra stared at the pile of dust, then at Elias. That was terrifying, she said. It felt polite, Elias said, flexing his hand. The gate wanted to open. It just needed permission. Lyra grabbed his shoulder. Do not anthropomorphize the infrastructure. Move! They slipped through the gate, but the sound of the collapsing lock had drawn attention. Behind them, shouts echoed in the alley. They've seen us, Lyra said. She broke into a run. Elias followed, his lungs burning. They scrambled over piles of discarded hull plating and ducked under hanging bundles of wires. Laser fire chewed up the ground behind them. In here, Lyra yelled. She shoved Elias into a narrow maintenance tube that ran along the side of a massive ventilation fan. It was a tight squeeze. The tube was barely wide enough for one person, let alone two. They scrambled deep into the shadows, pressing themselves against the curved metal wall as the patrol thundered past the opening. They were pinned. Lyra was pressed against Elias, her back to the wall, his body shielding her from the opening. There was absolutely no space. His chest was against hers. Her thigh was wedged between his legs. The silence in the tube was heavy. broken only by their ragged breathing. Elias froze. He was painfully aware of every point of contact. The warmth of her body through the thin fabric of her envoy suit. The scent of her, cold rain and ozone. Lyra looked up at him. In the gloom, her eyes were huge, black pools. She wasn't smiling, she wasn't mocking him. She looked rattled. The mark on Elias's wrist was pressed against the wall by her head. It was glowing softly, bathing her face in violet light. "You are too close," Lyra whispered. "I can't move," Elias whispered back. His voice was rough. Lyra's gaze dropped to his mouth, then snapped back up to his eyes. Her composure was fracturing. She was the lethal envoy, the woman who ruined careers with a smile. But right now, she looked like someone standing on a cliff edge, deciding whether to jump. "Do not touch me," she said. It was a command, but it lacked her usual steel. It sounded like a warning to herself. "Do not touch me unless you mean it." Elias looked at her. He saw the fear behind the arrogance. He saw the loneliness she hid under the politics. "That's the problem," Elias said, honesty spilling out of him before he could check it. "I'd mean it." Lyra's breath hitched. She stared at him, searching his face for the lie, for the diplomatic angle. She found none. For a second, neither of them moved. The tension was a physical weight, heavier than the gravity outside. The urge to close the final inch, to bridge the gap, was overwhelming. Then the sound of the patrol faded. Lyra exhaled, a shaky sound. She placed her hands on his chest lightly, carefully, and pushed him back half an inch. We need to keep moving," she said. Her voice was steady again, but the tremor was there. Elias nodded, swallowing hard. "Right. Moving." They shimmied out of the tube, the cool air of the scrapyard hitting their flushed skin. They didn't look at each other. They couldn't. The coordinates led them to the far edge of the scrapyard, to a dead end. A massive, cylindrical shaft dropped down into the darkness, blocked by a blast door that looked like it hadn't been opened in 1,000 years. It was covered in dead moss and petrified grime. "This is it," Elias said. He checked the mark. The coordinates stopped here. "It is a service elevator from the first era," Lyra said, examining the controls. "It is dead tech. There is no power source. We would need a fusion generator to jumpstart this." Elias stepped up to the control panel. It was a slab of stone with faint indentations. He held his hand up. "I don't think it runs on fusion," he said. He placed his palm near the stone. He made sure not to touch Lyra. He didn't even touch the panel. He just let the resonance flow. The obelisk mark flared white-hot. Deep beneath their feet, something groaned. A vibration shook the floor, dislodging centuries of dust. The stone panel lit up, not with electricity, but with the same violet light as the glyphs. The blast doors hissed. They split down the middle and retracted with a sound like grinding bones. Behind the doors was a cage elevator. It was ornate, made of black metal twisted into shapes that looked like vines. Lyra looked at the elevator, then at Elias. "Who are you?" she asked softly. "I'm just the tech support," Elias said, his smile weak. They stepped into the cage. As soon as they were inside, the doors slammed shut. The elevator dropped. It didn't fall. It descended with a terrifying speed, plunging them into the bedrock of the planet. The lights of the Undercity vanished, replaced by total darkness. Then, the lights of the shaft flickered on. They weren't electric lights. They were phosphorescent carvings in the rock wall. As they plummeted deeper, the carvings told a story. Lyra watched them, her eyes widening. "Those are figures," she said. Elias looked. The carvings showed bipedal shapes. They showed starships that looked remarkably like the brick-shaped vessels of Earth. They showed figures standing around the obelisk, hands raised, the glyphs glowing above them. The elevator slowed, coming to a soft halt at the bottom of the shaft. The doors opened. They stepped out into a cavern so vast the ceiling was lost in shadow. The floor was black glass, smooth as a mirror. And lining the walls, hundreds of meters high, were statues. They weren't aliens. They weren't abstract shapes. They were humans. They were dressed in ancient flowing armor, but the faces were unmistakable. They were human faces. Lyra turned to Elias. She looked at the statues, then back at him. Her worldview, the carefully constructed history of the Concord, cracked audibly in the silence. "Elias," she said, her voice echoing in the vast chamber. "These statues are 10,000 years old." Elias looked at the giant stone face staring down at him. It looked almost exactly like his grandfather. "Humanity just discovered FTL travel 50 years ago," Lyra whispered. "We are the new species. We are the children." Elias looked at his wrist. The mark was silent now, as if it was waiting for him to realize the punchline. "No," Elias said, the realization settling over him like a shroud. "We aren't new. We're just returning." He took a step forward, and the black glass floor lit up beneath his feet, a path illuminating toward the center of the chamber. "We've been here before." Lyra reached out and took his hand. This time, she didn't hover. She gripped it tight. "Then we are in trouble," she said, "because the Concord was built on the lie that you didn't exist. And if Soren finds out, she won't just hide this. She will erase it, and she will start with us." The chamber was a cathedral of silence, buried beneath miles of rock and deceit. The air here was stale, recycled by systems that had been running on emergency power since before the first brick of the surface city was laid. Elias Rook stood in the center of the obsidian floor, his neck craning back to look at the statues that lined the walls. They were titanic, carved from the living bedrock. They depicted figures in environmental suits that looked archaic yet strangely streamlined. But it was the faces that stopped Elias's heart. They were not the smooth, featureless masks of the Concord's progenitors, nor the angular, multi-eyed visages of the Vare. They were human, high cheekbones, rounded ears, soft jaws. He walked toward a pedestal near the feet of the nearest statue. It was covered in dust, but beneath the grime, faint lines of blue light pulsed in time with the mark on his wrist. Lyra Vare stood a few meters behind him. Her usually immaculate posture was gone, replaced by a rigid tension. She looked at the statues with a mixture of awe and horror. "This is impossible," she said. Her voice did not echo. The room was too vast. "The history of the Vare goes back 6,000 years. We have detailed records of every spacefaring civilization. Humans were discovered in the outer spiral arm less than a century ago. You are new." Elias wiped the dust from the pedestal. The script beneath was angular, sharp, and utterly alien to his eyes. Yet, as his hand hovered over it, the ring on his wrist flared, and the meaning slammed into his mind with the clarity of a bell. "It's not alien," Elias whispered. "It's a dialect, a root language." He read the inscription aloud. The words felt heavy on his tongue, syllables that hadn't been spoken in eons. "Here stand the seed-bearers, guardians of the node. We sleep until the cycle demands the truth." Lyra walked up beside him. She looked at the script, then at his face. "Seed-bearers?" she asked. Elias nodded, his eyes tracking the glowing lines. "We weren't discovered, Lyra. We left. We were here before the Concord, before the Vare. We built the network, And then we left, or we were forced out. Lyra turned away, looking up at the stone face of a human woman staring blindly into the dark. She let out a breath that was half laugh, half sigh. My entire education, she said softly. Every lecture on the hierarchy of species. Every speech about the Concord's benevolence in uplifting the primitive races. It was all a lie. She looked back at Elias. The hardness in her black eyes had fractured, revealing something raw and bruised underneath. So you are not the new species, she said. You are the forgotten one. And we are squatting in your house. Elias stepped away from the pedestal. He didn't feel triumphant. He felt a profound, aching sadness radiating from the walls. I don't think we were landlords, Elias said. I think we were janitors. We were maintaining something. He pointed to the center of the room. Embedded in the floor, flush with the black glass, was a smaller shard of the obelisk. It was a node, a jagged piece of the same lightless material, shaped like a fractured mirror. It's active, Elias said. I can feel it humming. They approached the node. As they got within 10 feet, the air suddenly thickened. It wasn't a change in pressure, it was a change in reality. The sound of their footsteps became muffled, as if they were walking underwater. Elias stumbled. A wave of dizziness hit him, but it wasn't physical. It was mental. The boundaries of his own skull seemed to dissolve. Lyra? He gasped. Lyra was clutching her head, her eyes squeezed shut. Get back! She yelled. But the words were out of sync with her lips, lagging by a second. Time stuttered. The room seemed to duplicate itself, layering past over present, and then the walls between their minds collapsed. Elias didn't just see Lyra. He was Lyra. He felt the cold, crushing pressure of a high-altitude terrace on the Vare homeworld. He was 6 years old, wearing a gown that was too tight, standing before a panel of adjudicators. He felt the desperate need to be perfect, the terror of being average. If you do not excel, you are discarded, a cold voice said. He felt the shame of crying in a bathroom stall, the resolve hardening into a diamond-sharp mask. He felt the sting of her first political betrayal, a lover who stole her research to buy a council seat. He felt the exhaustion, the bone-deep weariness of pretending to be unbreakable. Then the current reversed. Lyra gasped, her eyes flying open. She was staring at Elias, but she wasn't seeing the statues. She was seeing a small apartment in Ohio. She felt the silence of a room full of books. She felt the crushing weight of looking at the stars and knowing, with absolute certainty, that she didn't belong on the ground. She felt his fear, not of danger, but of being used, of being the harmless one, the funny one. Because if he stopped joking, he might have to scream. She felt the ache behind his ribs when he looked at her, not just attraction, but a terrifying, desperate hope that someone finally would see him. The connection severed with a violent snap. They were thrown backward, away from the node. Elias landed hard on his hip. Lyra skidded across the glass floor, catching herself on one hand. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The silence returned, but now it was heavy with the weight of stolen secrets. Elias sat up, rubbing his face. He felt exposed, flayed open. Lyra stood up slowly. She smoothed her robes, but her hands were shaking. She wouldn't look at him. That, she said, her voice trembling, was unacceptable. I didn't do it on purpose, Elias said hoarsely. It was the node. It leaked. Lyra turned on him. Her eyes were blazing, but there were tears standing in them, unfallen. I do not want to know, she said. I do not want to know about your apartment. I do not want to know how lonely you are, because if I know, I cannot do my job. I cannot treat you as a variable if I know how much it hurts you to be one. Elias stood up. He wanted to apologize, but apologies felt cheap after what they had just shared. And I saw you, he said quietly. I saw what they did to you. The pressure. Stop, Lyra commanded. She held up a hand, palm out, a barrier. No more mind reading, she said. Her voice was brittle. We have a mission. We are being hunted. We do not have the luxury of empathy. She took a breath, composing herself, rebuilding the walls that the node had smashed down. If we fall apart, she said, softer now, we do it honestly, with words, not that. Elias nodded. He respected the line. He needed the line too. Agreed, he said. He turned back to the node, careful not to step into the radius of the effect again. He squinted at the dark surface. There was data scrolling beneath the glass now, triggered by their proximity. He focused on the script. The mark on his wrist pulsed, decoding the flow. It's a file, Elias said. It's labeled Truth Protocol. What does it say? Lyra asked, staying well back. Elias read, his brow furrowed. It says the Obelisk isn't a judge. It's not a god. It's a server. It's a recording system. It was left here to monitor the development of new civilizations. When a species reaches a certain moral threshold, when they prioritize truth over power, the network activates. Lyra let out a sharp, bitter laugh. Then it should have stayed asleep forever. The Concord prioritizes profit over everything. That's the thing, Elias said, looking up. The Concord knows. He pointed to a section of the data stream that was flashing red. Look at this energy log. For the last 400 years, there has been a drain on the system, a localized siphon. Lyra stepped closer, squinting. That's signature. That is High Council technology. They've been bleeding it, Elias realized. They figured out that the Obelisk was a surveillance system. If it woke up, it would broadcast 4 centuries of corruption, bribery, and genocide to the entire galaxy. So they built the city around it. They built the dampeners. They've been siphoning off just enough energy to keep it in a coma. Lyra looked at the ceiling, toward the distant surface. Soren isn't protecting the galaxy from a contaminant, she said. She is protecting the Concord from its own criminal record. A boom shook the chamber. Dust rained down from the darkness above. Lyra's head snapped up. They found us, she said. The elevator shaft they had descended exploded inward. Debris crashed onto the black glass floor. Through the smoke, figures rappelled down, sleek, armored shapes with multi-spectrum visors. Soren's personal guard, Lyra said. She drew her energy pistol. The gravity in the chamber suddenly fluctuated. The explosion had damaged the ancient stabilizers. Elias felt his stomach lurch as his feet left the floor. He drifted upward, flailing. Stay low, Lyra shouted. She moved like a dancer in the low gravity. She kicked off a statue's shoulder, twisting in midair to fire 3 precise shots. 3 guards dropped before they even touched the ground. Elias grabbed the arm of a stone figure to anchor himself. He didn't have a weapon. He was an engineer in a war zone. Target the human, a distorted voice commanded from the smoke. Plasma fire erupted, scorching the air around Elias. He scrambled behind the statue's head. Lyra, get to cover, Elias yelled. Lyra was in the open, using the floating debris as shields. She was magnificent and terrifying, a blur of silver and lethal light. But there were too many of them. A squad was flanking her, moving to pin her against the node. Elias looked around. He couldn't fight them. But he could hear the room. The obelisk mark was humming, giving him a structural schematic of the chamber. He could feel the stress points in the ceiling, the fragility of the ancient columns. He saw a support strut near the enemy squad. It was cracked, holding by a thread. "Lyra!" Elias shouted. "Unmove left. 10 meters. Why?" she shouted back, ducking a bolt of blue fire. "Just do it." Lyra trusted him. She didn't hesitate. She fired a suppression volley and kicked off a floating rock, launching herself to the left. Elias focused on the strut. He didn't have explosives, but he had the resonance. He reached out his hand. He visualized the crack. He pushed his intent into the stone. Break! The mark flared. A pulse of kinetic force slammed into the strut. It shattered. A massive section of the ceiling, tons of rock and ancient machinery, sheared off. It fell in slow motion in the low gravity, a landslide of stone. It crashed directly onto the flanking squad, crushing them and blocking the main entry point. The impact shook the floor. The node hummed violently. "Elias!" Lyra called. She was hovering near a jagged tear in the back wall, a breach caused by the collapse. It led out into darkness. "We have to go!" she yelled. "More are coming!" Elias kicked off the statue and floated toward her. She grabbed his arm, the safe one, and hauled him into the breach. They scrambled through a tunnel of jagged rock, the sounds of battle fading behind them. The tunnel sloped upward, the air growing thinner and colder. They emerged not into another corridor, but onto the surface. They had come out miles from the city, in the forbidden wasteland of Vesol. It was night, but the desert glittered. The sand here was not silica. It was metallic dust, leftovers from some ancient industrial cataclysm. It swirled in the wind, sparkling like ground diamonds. The twin moons hung low and heavy in the sky. Elias shivered. The cold was instant and biting. "We are outside the atmospheric dome," he chattered. Lyra checked her wrist comp. "No. We are in the perimeter buffer. The air is breathable, but thin, and the temperature will drop to freezing in 1 hour." She looked back at the distant glow of the city. A massive force field shimmered over it, a bubble of warmth and lies. "We cannot go back," she said. "Soren has the exits locked down." "Where do we go?" Elias asked. He clutched his left shoulder. He had grazed it against a sharp rock during the escape, and blood was soaking his sleeve. Lyra pointed north, where the metallic dunes rolled like a frozen sea. "There are ruins out there," she said. "Pre-Concord structures. If your people built a network, there might be another access point." They walked. It was a brutal trek. The metallic sand crunched under their boots. The wind howled, carrying stinging grit that scoured their faces. Their comms were dead, jammed by the magnetic storm that perpetually raged over the wasteland. Elias stumbled more than once. The blood loss was making him lightheaded. "Keep moving," Lyra urged, her voice fighting the wind. "If we stop, the crawlers will find us." "Crawlers?" "Scavengers," Lyra said grimly. "Silicon-based predators. They are attracted to electromagnetic pulses, and you, Elias, are a walking beacon." Elias looked at his wrist. The mark was pulsing steadily, a lighthouse in the dark. "Great," he muttered. "I'm a glow stick for space wolves." They found shelter 2 hours later, in the hollow of a crashed ancient starship hull. It was half buried in the sand, a skeletal ribcage of rusted metal. They crawled inside, out of the biting wind. It was cramped and dark, smelling of oxidized iron. Lyra activated a small heat lamp from her survival kit. It cast a warm orange glow against the rusted walls. "Sit," she ordered. "Let me look at that shoulder." Elias sat, leaning back against the curved metal. He hissed as he peeled back his torn jacket. The cut was deep, an ugly gash across his deltoid. Lyra opened a med pack. Her hands, usually so deadly, were gentle now. She cleaned the wound with antiseptic foam. Elias watched her face in the orange light. She was focused, her brow furrowed. The arrogance was gone. The exhaustion was back. But it was a shared exhaustion now. "You saved me back there," Lyra said quietly, applying a bio-seal patch. "The ceiling. How did you do that?" "I didn't do it," Elias said, wincing. "I just asked the rock to let go. It was ready to fall. I just gave it permission." Lyra paused. Her fingers hovered just above his skin, smoothing the edge of the bandage. She didn't pull away. "Permission," she repeated. "A strange weapon." "It's not a weapon," Elias said. "It's a conversation." Lyra looked up, her eyes locked with his. The heat lamp hummed between them. The wind howled outside. Elias felt the pull again, not the Obelisk's pull. The other one. The one that had nothing to do with ancient aliens and everything to do with the woman kneeling in the dirt in front of him. "You know," Elias said, his voice weak but the corner of his mouth quirking up. "If you wanted to get me alone in a romantic desert getaway, you could have just asked. You didn't have to collapse a government." Lyra stared at him. For a second, he thought she might hit him. Then, she laughed. It wasn't the polite, diplomatic titter she used at parties. It was a real sound, a rusty, surprised bark of laughter that shook her shoulders. "You are an idiot," she said, shaking her head. "A statistically improbable idiot." The sound changed the air in the hull. The fear receded. The cold felt less biting. Lyra finished the bandage. She didn't move her hand away from his arm. She stayed there, leaning in slightly. Elias stopped breathing. Lyra looked at his mouth, then up to his eyes. The question was there. The permission was there. She leaned closer. Elias could feel her breath warm against his cheek. He leaned in to meet her. Their lips were millimeters apart. Both of them were shaking. It would be so easy. It would be a way to forget the cold, the danger, the terrifying truth of the statues. But Lyra stopped. She pulled back an inch. Her eyes were searching his. "Not because we are afraid," she whispered. "No," Elias whispered back. "Not because of fear. Because we are choosing," she said. "Because when I kiss you, Elias Rook, I want to know that I am doing it because I want to, not because the world is ending." Elias nodded. He reached out and took her hand, her right hand, the one without the gun. He squeezed it. "Deal," he said. "Survive first, kiss later." Lyra squeezed back. "It is a good plan." A sudden burst of static cut through the moment. Lyra's comms unit, which had been silent, crackled to life. "Lyra, can you hear me?" It was Jax. The signal was weak, distorted by the storm. "Jax." Lyra grabbed the unit. "We are alive. We are in the ruins." "You need to move," Jax's voice came through, sounding panicked. "The council just voted. Soren declared a state of emergency. She has full martial law powers." "That was expected," Lyra said. "No, you don't understand," Jax shouted. "Good, they aren't just hunting you. They are scrubbing the narrative. They just released a report saying that Elias is a bioterrorist carrying a synthetic virus. They are evacuating the sector. They are going to glass the ruins to sterilize the infection." Lyra's face went pale. "Glassing. Orbital bombardment. How long?" she asked. Jax hesitated. "Maybe an hour. But listen, I found something. The fragments in the ruin field? They aren't just rocks. They are repeaters." Elias grabbed the comms. "Repeaters for what?" "For the archive," Jax yelled. Soren deleted the location from the main database. But the fragments, if you can wake one up, it might have a hardline connection. Signal lost. The static returned. Lyra looked at Elias. 1 hour. "We have to find a fragment," Elias said. He scrambled to his feet, ignoring the pain in his shoulder. They exited the hull back into the storm. The wind was stronger now, tearing at their clothes. They ran through the metallic dunes, scanning the horizon. There, Elias pointed. Jutting out of the sand like a broken tooth was a black monolith. It was smaller than the city obelisk, broken in half, but it was made of the same lightless stone. They sprinted toward it. Elias fell to his knees at the base of the fragment. He placed his hand on the cold stone. "Wake up," he pleaded. "Show me the way." The fragment didn't flare with light. It vibrated, a low, subsonic thrumming that shook the sand around them. Elias's head snapped back. The map. He saw it. Not a location on the planet. A location in the sky. "It's not here," Elias shouted over the wind. "The Central Archive. It's not on Vesol. It's inside an asteroid and a moving asteroid in the outer belt." He looked at the sky. He could see the path, a glowing line drawn in the stars that only he could see. "We need a ship," Lyra said. Her comms beeped again. A text message. Lyra looked at it. Her eyes widened. "It is from Counselor Vane," she said. "He is an old rival of Soren's. He says he has a transport ship waiting at the northern extract point. He wants to help us expose her." Elias frowned. "Why now?" "Because if Soren wins, he dies too," Lyra said. "It is a calculated risk." They ran. The northern point was a click away. They crested a dune and saw it. A sleek, unmarked courier ship sat on a flat expanse of rock, its engines humming. The ramp was down. A figure stood at the bottom of the ramp. Counselor Vane. He was waving them forward. "We made it," Elias yelled. They slid down the dune, running toward the ship. Vane smiled. He raised a hand in greeting. Lyra slowed down. Something was wrong. Vane wasn't wearing an environmental suit. He was smiling, in a toxic sandstorm. Lyra stopped. "Elias, wait!" A laser shot rang out. It was a silent, clean sound. Counselor Vane's head snapped back. He crumpled to the ground. Behind him, emerging from the ship, was not a rescue team. It was a squad of Soren's elites. And behind them, a projection of Soren herself flickered into existence on the hull of the ship. She looked down at Lyra and Elias, her face 10 feet tall. "Did you really think," Soren's voice boomed, "that I would leave loose ends?" The soldiers raised their rifles. Lyra shoved Elias behind her. "Run!" she screamed, but there was nowhere to run. They were in the open. The soldiers fired. The screen went white, but not from the lasers, from the sky. High above, through the swirling clouds, a beam of coherent light slammed into the ground between them and the ship. The sand turned to glass instantly. The blast wave threw Lyra and Elias backward into the dunes. The soldiers scrambled for cover. Lyra looked up, dazed. That wasn't the Concorde. She coughed. A second ship broke through the clouds. It was ugly, brick-shaped, and painted in the drab gray of the United Earth Coalition. It was Elias's transport, the garbage truck. Ambassador Harrow's voice crackled over the open frequency, sounding furious and terrified. "Get away from my staff!" Harrow screamed. The Earthship unleashed a barrage of primitive, chaotic kinetic missiles. They weren't precise, but they were loud, and they churned up enough sand to create a wall of cover. The loading ramp of the Earthship dropped while it was still hovering 10 feet off the ground. "Jump!" Harrow yelled. Lyra looked at Elias. "Well," she said, grabbing his hand, "it seems your species has a talent for being annoying at exactly the right time." They ran for the ramp. The transfer from the lumbering Earth transport to the stolen courier vessel was less a tactical maneuver and more a desperate leap into the void. Ambassador Harrow's ship, the unfortunate brick, as Lyra called it, was taking heavy fire from 3 separate vectors. It was a miracle of redundant engineering that it had not yet vaporized, but its shields were buckling under the precision strikes of the Council interceptors. Lyra Vare moved through the chaos with a terrifying stillness. The ambush at the extraction point had stripped away the last layers of her diplomatic persona. There was no more wit, no more performative exhaustion. There was only cold calculation. She had watched Counselor Vane die, a man she had known for a decade, a man who had brought her tea during long negotiation sessions, and she had filed his death away not as a tragedy, but as fuel. "We are docking with the automated courier drone in Sector 4, Lyra said, her voice flat over the screaming alarms of the Earthship's bridge. "Harrow, drop your shields on the port quadrant for 3 seconds. "Are you insane?" Harrow shouted, clutching a console as the ship shuddered. "Do it," Lyra commanded, "or you die, and my witness dies with you." Harrow dropped the shields. Lyra grabbed Elias by the back of his tactical vest and shoved him into the airlock. They blew the hatch, drifting across the narrow vacuum gap to the sleek, needle-nosed vessel Jax had remotely hijacked for them. It was a Vel-class courier, engines hot, unmarked, and illegal in 12 systems. They cycled the airlock and tumbled onto the bridge of the new ship. The interior was cramped, smelling of recycled air and expensive coolant. Lyra slapped the door seal and vaulted into the pilot's seat. "Jax," she said to the empty air, "wake it up." The ship's lights flickered from dormant amber to combat red. A holographic avatar materialized on the dashboard. It was a stylized, geometric face, glowing a soft, arrogant blue. "Greetings," the AI said. Its voice was smooth, masculine, and dripping with unearned confidence. "I am designated Unit 79 Alpha. You may call me Darling, as most pilots eventually do." Lyra ignored the flirtation. "Get us out of here. 7, maximum thrust, vector Z +9. The AI's avatar tilted its head, looking at Lyra. "My sensors indicate you have an elevated heart rate and dilated pupils. You look ravishing when you are in mortal peril." "Fly the ship," Lyra snarled, her hands flying across the manual overrides. The AI turned its attention to Elias, who was strapping himself into the co-pilot's seat with shaking hands. "And what is this?" the AI asked, its tone shifting to one of mild disgust. "It is biologically loud. Its pheromones smell like anxiety and cheap detergent. I am a human," Elias said, snapping the buckle shut. "And I am currently the only thing stopping this ship from being turned into scrap." The AI sighed, disappointing. "I was hoping for a pet." The ship lurched as the main engines ignited. They shot away from the Earth transport, leaving the battle behind in a streak of blue ion trails. But they were not clear. "Proximity alert," the AI said, sounding bored. 3 Council interceptors are tracking us. And, oh, this is interesting. 2 unrecognized vessels, no transponder signals. High-energy signatures. Lyra pulled up the rear tactical display. The Council ships were fast, triangular wedges of white alloy. But the other 2 were different. They were matte gray, featureless spheres that moved without banking, defying inertia. "Who are they?" Elias asked. "Mercenaries," Lyra said. "Or a private corporate fleet." "No," Elias said. He looked at the screen, then at his wrist. The black mark was throbbing, a dull ache that radiated up his arm. "They feel quiet." One of the gray spheres fired. There was no beam, no projectile. The Council ship trailing them simply ceased to function. Its lights died, its engines cut. It drifted into a spin, dead in the water. "They are using subspace scissors," Lyra said, her eyes widening. "That is forbidden tech. It severs the connection between the ship's core and the local physics grid. It cuts communications like a wire. Who has that kind of tech? Elias asked. No one, Lyra said grimly. No one who exists on the official census. The second gray sphere rotated, aiming at them. Evasive maneuvers, Lyra shouted, banking the ship hard to the left. The AI complained. That maneuver exceeded structural warranties. I will be logging a complaint with the rental agency. Shut up, Lyra and Elias said in unison. The silent weapon fired. The beam was invisible, but the ship groaned as the wave passed inches from their hull. The comm system sparked and died. The navigation computer flickered, the star chart dissolving into static. We are blind, the AI announced, sounding slightly less arrogant. Navigation sensors are offline. I cannot calculate a jump trajectory without a star lock. Lyra gripped the controls, her knuckles white. We cannot jump blind. We will end up inside a sun. Elias unbuckled his restraints. What are you doing? Lyra yelled. I can steer, Elias said. He scrambled over the console, pushing Lyra's hands away from the nav computer. He placed his left hand, the one with the bracelet of night, directly onto the black glass of the interface panel. Don't be stupid, Rook, Lyra warned. That is a complex navigational matrix. You cannot just... Elias closed his eyes. He didn't look at the screen. He reached out with his mind, following the pull that had been tugging at his chest since he touched the obelisk. The universe wasn't empty. It wasn't just a vacuum with rocks in it. It was a web. He saw the lines, great currents of gravity and memory stretching between the stars, ancient highways that the Concorde had paved over and forgotten. He saw the gray spheres behind them, dark knots in the weave. He saw the asteroid belt ahead, a swirling river of dust, and he saw a path, a narrow, twisting thread of silver light that wove through the debris field, a lane that didn't exist on any chart because it required a pilot who could feel the drift of the rocks before they moved. Turn 30 degrees starboard, Elias ordered, his voice echoing slightly, as if he were speaking from a large room. Lyra looked at him. His eyes were closed. The mark on his wrist was glowing so bright it cast shadows on the ceiling. She didn't argue. She turned the wheel. Now drop, Elias said. Dive, straight down. Lyra pushed the yoke forward. The ship plunged toward a dense cluster of asteroids. You are going to kill us, the AI shrieked. Elias didn't flinch. Now, full thrust. Lyra slammed the throttle. They shot into the asteroid field. Rocks the size of cities tumbled around them. To the sensors, it was a wall of death. To Elias, it was a dance floor. He guided them with small, precise movements of his hand on the console. Left. Up. Roll. Hard stop. Go. The ship wove through the crushing rocks with millimeters to spare. The gray spheres tried to follow, but they relied on sensors, not instinct. One of them clipped a rotating iron moon and shattered, blooming into a silent fireball. The other pulled back, unwilling to risk the gauntlet. They broke through the other side of the belt, into the deep, quiet dark of the outer rim. Elias pulled his hand back. He gasped, slumping into the co-pilot seat. Sweat dripped from his nose. Lyra engaged the stealth drive. She set the autopilot to maintain a random drift. Then she swiveled her chair to face him. The bridge was silent, save for the hum of the reactor. The AI, sensing the mood, wisely deactivated its avatar. Lyra looked at Elias for a long time. She looked at his heaving chest, his sweat-dampened hair, and the way he was cradling his wrist. "What are you?" she asked softly. It wasn't an accusation, it was a genuine question. Elias looked up. "I'm Elias. I'm the guy who fixes the coffee machine." "No," Lyra said. She stood up and walked over to him. She leaned against the console, crossing her arms. A coffee machine technician does not navigate a debris field blindfolded. You connected to the ship. Elias, I felt it. The drive core. It synced with your heartbeat. She leaned closer, her eyes searching his. Is it you flying the ship? Or is it the Obelisk using you as a joystick? Elias looked at his hands. They were trembling. I don't know, he admitted. His voice was small. When I touch it, I feel something vast. It's watching me. Lyra, it's watching through me. Is it malevolent? Lyra asked. No, Elias said. It's not angry. It's not kind. It's just waiting. It's like a library that wants to be read. But it responds to intent. Elias said, when we were in the desert, when the ceiling fell, I wanted to protect you. And the rock listened. Just now I wanted to get us out. And the path opened. It doesn't care about bloodlines. It doesn't care that I'm human. It cares about what I want. And that terrifies you, Lyra stated. Yes, Elias said, because I've never had power before. And I'm afraid that if I keep using it, I won't be Elias anymore. I'll just be the interface. Lyra reached out. She placed a hand on his knee. It was a grounding touch. Solid, real. You are still you, she said firmly. The obelisk is loud, Elias, but you are stubborn. I have seen you argue with a vending machine for 10 minutes over a dispensed cup. You will not be erased easily. Elias managed a weak smile. It took my money and didn't give me the tea. It was a matter of principle. Lyra didn't smile back. She looked at the star field. We are approaching the coordinates you saw, she said. The moving asteroid. The asteroid was not a rock. It was a fortress disguised as debris. It was massive, the size of a small moon, tumbling through the void in a complex, unnatural rotation. As they approached, the surface texture resolved not into craters, but into layers of interlocking plates. It looked like a puzzle box made of continental shelves. There is no docking bay, the AI announced, reappearing. And I am detecting a localized gravity distortion that makes me want to vomit my code. Fly us to the pole, Elias said, pointing to the northern axis of the rotation. There's a gate. Lyra brought the ship in, as they hovered over the North Pole. Elias saw it, a circle of silver metal embedded in the rock, engraved with the same angular script he had seen in the underground chamber. He went to the airlock. You have to come with me, Elias said. Lyra checked her energy pistol. Obviously, I am not leaving you alone with a haunted moon. They suited up in EVA gear, sleek, pressurized suits that clung to their frames. They tethered themselves to the ship and jumped. The silence of space was absolute. Elias floated down toward the silver circle. He landed boots first, the magnetic clamps engaging with a silent thud. Lyra landed beside him. The gate was sealed. There were no handles, only a series of raised plates, each bearing a symbol. Elias knelt. He didn't know the symbols, but the mark knew. The key is not a password. The voice in his head whispered, the key is a sequence of truths. He pressed his hand on the first plate. It depicted a sun. Light, he thought. The plate sank in. He pressed the second. A hand. Action. He pressed the third. An eye. Witness. The ground beneath them shuddered. The silver circle spiraled open like the iris of a camera, revealing a shaft of pure, lightless dark. They descended. Gravity reasserted itself as they passed the threshold. They dropped through a long, smooth tunnel and landed on a walkway that suspended over nothing. They were inside the central archive. It was a hollow world. The interior of the asteroid had been carved out into a sphere of impossible size. The walls were lined with millions of crystalline alcoves, each glowing with a faint, amber light. But below the walkway, in the center of the sphere, was a lake. It wasn't water. It was a pool of black liquid that rippled without wind. And floating above the lake were the memories. They were holographic constructs, but dense, nearly solid. Elias saw a creature that looked like a cloud of bioluminescent gas, singing a song that vibrated in his teeth. He saw a city of glass shattering under a bombardment. He saw a child of a species long extinct playing with a toy made of bone. "It is a graveyard," Lyra whispered. "No," Elias said. "It's a backup drive." A voice spoke. It came from everywhere and nowhere. It was not the geometric voice of the obelisk. This voice was softer, sadder, and sounded like it was made of 1,000 different whispers layered together. "Welcome, seed-bearer. Welcome, daughter of the Vare." A figure materialized on the walkway in front of them. It was tall, draped in robes that shifted color like oil on water. It had no face, only a smooth, reflective surface where a face should be. "I am the witness," the figure said. "I am the curator of the deleted." Lyra raised her weapon. "Identify yourself." "I am the intelligence that lives in the glass." The witness said, "I preserve what the Concord burn." It glided forward. "You seek the truth of the conspiracy." It said, "You seek to stop the war." "We seek proof," Lyra said. "Soren Kale is planning to—" "I know what she plans." The witness interrupted. It turned its mirrored face to Elias. "Soren Kale does not want to destroy the obelisk. She wants to enslave it. She has manufactured a crisis, the Earth contagion, to terrify the Council. She will instigate a war that will burn 12 systems. And when the panic is at its peak, she will use a counterfeit key to force the obelisk to activate as a weapon. She will end the war she started and crown herself the savior of the galaxy." Elias felt a chill. "She wants to be a god. She wants order," the witness corrected, "which is often the same thing to the ambitious." The figure gestured to the air. A sphere of data materialized, a complex, glowing orb of code. "Here is the proof," the witness said. "The financial trails, the communication logs, the blueprints for the counterfeit key. It is enough to hang her." Lyra reached for it. "Wait," the witness said. The sphere recoiled. "Truth is not a gift," the witness said. "It is a transaction. To take the truth, you must give it." The mirrored face turned to Lyra. "You, Lyra Vare. You hate the Council. You hate their hypocrisy. But you love the game. You love the moment when you outsmart an opponent. You love the feeling of your boot on their neck, metaphorically speaking. You enjoyed ruining Ambassador Krell's career last year. You savored it." Lyra stiffened, her face flushed. That was necessary. He was corrupt. But you enjoyed it. The witness pressed. "You are not a crusader. Lyra, you are a predator who hunts predators. Admit it." Lyra lowered her gun. Her hands were shaking. She looked at Elias, then back at the mirror. "Yes," she whispered. "I liked it. I liked winning. I liked proving I was smarter than them. Because if I wasn't smarter, I was just a girl who was sold to the academy by her parents to pay a debt." The witness nodded. It turned to Elias. "And you, Elias Rook, you claim you want to save the galaxy. You claim you are just the technician, but that is a lie." Elias stepped back. "I don't want power." "No," the witness said. "You want belonging. You are lonely. Elias, you have spent your life fixing things for people who don't know your name. You joke to keep people away because if they get close, they might leave. You don't just want Lyra because she is beautiful. You want her because she is the first person who looked at you and saw a threat, not furniture. You want to be dangerous. You want to be seen. Elias felt the air leave his lungs. It was true. God. It was true. He didn't want to be the harmless human anymore. He wanted to matter. I just want to stay, Elias whispered. I'm tired of leaving. The witness bowed its head. The truth is accepted. The data sphere floated toward them. Suddenly, the walkway shuddered. A deafening explosion ripped through the silence of the archive. The ceiling of the cavern miles above cracked open. Debris rained down. Through the breach, figures descended on gravity lines. They were dressed in gray robes, wearing masks that were completely featureless. The third faction, Lyra said, spinning around. The silenced. The witness said, its voice turning sharp. The exiled archivists. They believe the obelisk should never wake. They believe silence is the only safety. They are here to kill you. Elias. Gunfire erupted the mud. But these weren't lasers. They were the silent rounds. A section of the walkway disintegrated. Run, the witness commanded. Take the sphere. Lyra grabbed the data sphere and shoved it into her suit pouch. She grabbed Elias's hand. They sprinted down the walkway. The gray figures dropped ahead of them, blocking the path. The archive turned into a war zone. The memory pools below began to boil. As the silent rounds hit the crystalline walls, the archive began to bleed light. Liquid gold poured from the shattered alcoves, swirling into the air. Holographic ghosts screamed in dead languages, running alongside Lyra and Elias as the reality of the simulation broke down. Jump! Lyra yelled. They leaped across a gap where the bridge had collapsed, landing on a lower platform. A gray-robed figure lunged at Elias with a vibrating blade. Lyra didn't hesitate. She pistol-whipped the attacker, then kicked him into the pool of black memory below. He vanished without a splash. They scrambled into a narrow side vault, a small chamber cut into the rock wall. Lyra hit the door seal. The heavy stone slab slammed shut, muffling the chaos outside. They were in the dark. The only light came from the glowing brand on Elias's wrist and the faint hum of the data sphere in Lyra's pocket. The vault was tiny. They were pressed together, chest to chest, breathing hard. Safe. Lyra gasped. For a minute. Elias leaned his head back against the stone. He was shaking. The adrenaline was crashing, leaving him raw. They know who I am, Elias said. The witness. It knew. Lyra looked at him in the dim violet light. Her face was smeared with soot, her hair escaping its perfect braid. She looked wild. It knew me too, she said. She looked down at his chest, avoiding his eyes. It was right, she whispered. I am ambitious. I am arrogant. I have spent my whole life building armor. Elias, layer after layer. Because I thought if I was strong enough, no one could hurt me again. She looked up. Her eyes were wet. And then you showed up. With your broken translator and your terrible jokes and your eyes that see everything. And you make me feel unarmored. She stepped closer. There was no space left. It scares me, she confessed. I have always controlled everything, my career, my image, my desires. But with you, I feel undone. I want you, Elias. And I don't know how to want something I can't control. Elias looked at her. He saw the terrifying vulnerability in the face of the woman who could dismantle governments. He reached up. He didn't grab her. He didn't pull her in. He placed his hands on the wall on either side of her head. He created a space for her. You don't have to control it, he said softly. And you don't have to surrender. He leaned in, stopping an inch from her lips. I'm not a conquest, Lyra, and I'm not a fan. I'm just the guy who sees you, all of you, even the sharp parts. Lyra's breath hitched. The witness said I want to be dangerous. Elias said. Maybe, but mostly I just want to be allowed. I want to be here because you want me here. Lyra closed her eyes. A tear tracked through the soot on her cheek. I want you here, she whispered. She bridged the gap. She kissed him. It wasn't a desperate movie star kiss. It was slow. It was deliberate. It was shaking with the force of two people who had spent their lives hiding. Finally stepping into the light. It tasted of sweat and fear and absolute, undeniable truth. Elias's hands moved from the wall to her waist, pulling her in. Lyra's hands tangled in his hair, gripping tight, anchoring herself. The obelisk mark flared, bathing them in a heartbeat of violet light. It didn't burn. It felt like applause. They broke apart, foreheads resting against each other, gasping for air. Elias ran his thumb over her cheekbone. Okay, he breathed. Okay. Lyra opened her eyes. The steel was back, but it wasn't brittle anymore. It was tempered. We have to go, she said, her voice husky. We have to finish this. She checked her pistol. They opened the vault door. The archive was tearing itself apart. The gray-robed figures were retreating as the memory pools overflowed, flooding the chamber with liquid history. They sprinted for the upper exit. The witness appeared one last time at the gate, flickering like a dying candle. It reached out and touched Lyra's shoulder. A sensation of ice burned through her suit. A sigil burned itself into the fabric of her armor, glowing white. Truth carries consequence. The witness's voice echoed in their minds. You carry the burden now. And then, a final warning, booming through the collapsing cavern. The obelisk will not be controlled. It will choose, and it is choosing now. They threw themselves into the airlock of their stolen ship just as the gate collapsed behind them. Lyra slammed the launch sequence. The ship shot away from the asteroid, engines screaming, behind them. The asteroid didn't just break, it unfolded. The stone shell cracked open, revealing a core of pure, blinding light that pulsed in time with Elias's wrist. Elias sat in the co-pilot seat, watching the screen. He held Lyra's hand across the center console. He's waking up, Elias said. Lyra looked at the data sphere in her lap, then at the man beside her. Then let's go home, she said. And let's make some noise. The return to Vaysol was not a diplomatic arrival. It was a descent into a fortress under siege. From the cockpit of the stolen courier ship, Elias Rook watched the planet grow larger in the viewport. It didn't look like the jewel of the Concord anymore. The glittering lights of the capital city were harsh and white, the signature of high-intensity security grids. A flotilla of warships formed a blockade in orbit, a net of steel meant to catch one very specific human. They have declared martial law, Lyra Vare said, her hands moving over the controls with a speed that blurred. And according to the encrypted feeds Jax is intercepting, your public purification is scheduled for sunset. Purification, Elias repeated, staring at the blockade. That is a very polite word for an execution. They want to burn the contagion out, Lyra said grimly. Soren is selling fear, and the market is buying. She banked the ship hard, slipping into the radar shadow of a massive cargo hauler. We cannot breach the orbital net, she said. If we try to land at the spaceport, we will be vaporized before we clear the atmosphere. So we go under, Elias said. Lyra nodded. She punched a command into the console. Jax, are the coordinates for the aquatic intake ready? The holographic avatar of the chaotic Yulton broker fizzled into existence on the dashboard. He was wearing a party hat, for reasons Elias was afraid to ask about. Ready and waiting? Boss, Jax chirped. I have hacked a waste disposal drone to carry you in. It smells terrible, but it has excellent clearance codes. Also, I have prepared the broadcast package. Elias leaned forward. You have the files from the archive? Oh, I have everything, Jack said, rubbing his furry hands together. The money trails, the communication logs, the blueprints for Soren's fake key. It is a beautiful disaster waiting to happen. I have keyed it to override every screen, speaker, and holographic billboard in the city. I call it Operation Truth Bomb. Catchy, Elias said. I also added a soundtrack, Jax added proudly. Lyra froze. You did not. It needed gravity, Jax insisted. A revolution needs a theme song. I found a piece of ancient Earth classical music. It is called Flight of the Bumblebee. It is very frantic. Delete it, Lyra ordered. We are exposing a galactic conspiracy, not opening a circus. Wait, Elias said, raising a hand. Lyra looked at him as if he had grown a second head. You cannot be serious. Humanity deserves flair. Lyra, Elias said, a small, reckless smile touching his lips. If I am going to be purified, I want my entrance to be memorable. I vote yes on the Bumblebee. Lyra stared at him. She looked at Jax. She looked back at Elias. I hate you both, she said. But she didn't rescind the order. The aquatic intake was a nightmare of rusted metal and crushing pressure. They had abandoned the courier ship in the upper atmosphere, dropping in a stealth pod that splashed down into the ocean surrounding the crater city. Now, they were swimming through the submerged service tunnels that fed water to the city's cooling systems. They wore rebreather masks and sleek black tactical suits Lyra had scavenged from the ship's armory. The water was dark, illuminated only by the faint, ghostly glow of bioluminescent algae that clung to the walls like living slime. Elias kicked his fins, following the silver trail of Lyra's bubbles. He felt heavy. The water pressed against him, but the pressure in his chest was worse. The closer they got to the crater, the more the mark on his wrist burned. It wasn't the sharp sting of a burn. It was a dull, throbbing ache, like a bone healing badly. The obelisk was calling him. He could feel it vibrating in the water, a low-frequency hum that rattled his teeth. It felt like a magnet dragging iron filings through his veins. Lyra signaled for a halt. They drifted near a massive intake fan, the blades slowly churning the dark water. Below them, silent shapes glided through the gloom. Security drones. Lyra's voice came over the localized comms in his ear. Shark class. They track movement and heartbeat. How do we get past them? Elias whispered. We drift, Lyra said. Let the current take us through the fan blades. Do not swim. Do not panic. If your heart rate spikes, they will eat you. Elias closed his eyes. Do not panic. Easy instructions for someone who wasn't currently acting as a lightning rod for an ancient alien supercomputer. He forced his body to go limp. The current caught him. He drifted toward the spinning blades. The gap between them was large enough for a person, but the timing had to be perfect. He felt the displacement of water as a drone passed inches beneath him. It was a sleek, eyeless torpedo of gray metal. It paused, sensing something. Elias held his breath. He focused on the math of the fan blades, rotation speed, velocity, angle of entry. The drone moved on. The current swept him through the fan. The blade passed so close the turbulence tumbled him like a rag doll. He emerged on the other side, into a calm, air-filled chamber. They surfaced, gasping as the rebreathers disengaged. They dragged themselves onto a rusted metal walkway. Elias rolled onto his back, ripping the mask off. He clutched his wrist. The violet light of the mark was illuminating the dark tunnel, pulsing rapidly. Turn it off, Lyra hissed, crawling over to him. I can't, Elias groaned. It's too close. It knows I'm here. It's happy. Lyra, it feels relieved. Lyra grabbed a strip of thermal tape from her belt and wrapped it tightly around his wrist, dampening the light. We are directly beneath the plaza, she said. There is a maintenance lift that leads to the surface. She stood up and offered him a hand. Elias took it. Her grip was strong, but her gloves were cold and wet. When we get up there, Lyra said, her voice dropping, there is no going back. Soren will kill us the moment she sees us. Then we better make sure she sees the truth first, Elias said. The sun was setting over Vesol, casting long, blood-red shadows across the plaza of the Ascendant. The crowd was immense. It seemed as if the entire population of the city had been heralded into the square. There were thousands of species, a sea of chitin, fur, and skin, all pressed together by the cordon of armed guards. In the center, the obelisk stood silent and black, absorbing the red light of the dying day. A stage had been erected at its base. High Curator Soren Kale stood there, draped in robes of white gold that seemed to shine with their own inner light. She looked regal. She looked like a savior. Elias and Lyra stood in the shadow of a colonnade at the edge of the plaza. They were disguised. Lyra wore the ceremonial armor of a temple guard, a towering suit of burnished bronze with a full-face helmet. She had incapacitated the original owner in the maintenance bay with a frighteningly efficient nerve pinch. Elias wore the robes of an acolyte, his face hidden behind a heavy porcelain mask painted with a vow of silence. He hated the mask. The eye slits were narrow, cutting off his peripheral vision. He felt suffocated, but mostly, he hated that he couldn't see Lyra. He couldn't see her eyes. He couldn't read the micro-expressions that told him what she was thinking. He was blind to her. The mark on his wrist was screaming now. It felt like his hand was in a fire. His breathing was ragged behind the porcelain. Lyra sensed it. She didn't look at him. Guard protocol demanded rigid attention forward, but she shifted her stance. She reached out with her left hand, her fingers gauntleted in bronze. She touched his cheek, right over the mask. It wasn't a caress. It was two fingers, pressing firm and steady against the porcelain. A grounding point. I am here, the touch said. You are not just a tool. Elias let out a shuddering breath. He leaned into her hand for a fraction of a second. The pain in his wrist receded. The chaotic noise of the obelisk in his head quieted, replacing the roar with a steady, waiting hum. It recognized her. It recognized the choice. Lyra dropped her hand. Ready? She whispered over the encrypted channel. Elias straightened his spine. Let's play the music. On the stage. Soren raised her arms. The crowd fell silent. Children of the Concord, her voice boomed, amplified by hidden speakers. We stand at a precipice. The galaxy is under threat, not from armies, but from chaos. The Earth creature, this Elias Rook, has infected our sacred network with a biological corruption. A murmur of fear rippled through the crowd. He seeks to silence the obelisk, Soren shouted. He seeks to sever our connection to the divine. But I will not let that happen. I have taken the burden upon myself. I have communicated with the obelisk. I have quieted its pain. She turned to face the black monolith. Tonight, we purify the infection, and tomorrow, the obelisk will speak for the first time in centuries to bless our new order. Now, Lyra said. Elias tapped the activator in his pocket. The sound system of the plaza screeched with feedback. The holographic banners that displayed Soren's face flickered and died. And then, the music started. It was frantic. It was absurd. It was Flight of the Bumblebee, played at maximum volume on a galactic sound system. The violin sawed through the tense atmosphere like a chainsaw through silk. The crowd looked around confused. Soren froze, her mouth open in mid-sentence. Then the screens lit up. But it wasn't Soren's face. It was a document, a bank transfer record, massive and undeniable, showing billions of credits flowing from the council treasury to a private mercenary fleet. Then came the audio logs, Soren's voice, clear and cold. Trigger the explosion in the lower sector. Blame the Earth delegation. Make sure the body count is high enough to justify martial law. The crowd gasped. The sound was like a thunderclap. Soren screamed at her technicians. Cut it! Cut the feed! But the feed didn't cut. Jax's virus was eating the firewalls. New images appeared. Video footage from the archive. Soren standing with corporate warlords, shaking hands over a holographic map of the conquered, carving up territories like a cake. The plaza erupted. Confusion turned to anger. The guards looked at each other, weapons wavering. Soren saw she was losing them. Her face twisted, the mask of benevolence shattering to reveal the tyrant beneath. "Lies!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "This is the contagion. It is a trick." She ripped off her white glove. "Behold!" she yelled, holding her hand up to the obelisk. "I am the chosen. I bear the mark." On her wrist, a black ring was visible. The crowd hesitated. Elias stepped out from the colonnade. He reached up and tore the porcelain mask from his face. He threw it to the ground. It shattered. He walked toward the stage. He was just a human in dirty robes, looking tired and small against the scale of the plaza. Lyra walked beside him, her hand resting on the hilt of her sword, her helmet still on, an anonymous guardian of the truth. "That is not a mark," Elias said. His voice wasn't amplified, but in the stunned silence between the musical notes, it carried. Soren spun around. "You! Kill him!" The guards raised their rifles. Lyra drew her energy pistol in a blur of motion. She didn't fire at the guards. She fired into the air, a warning shot that sizzled through the atmosphere. "Stand down!" she commanded, her voice amplified by her helmet speakers. "Look at her wrist. Look closely." The giant screens shifted. Jax, watching from somewhere in the ether, zoomed the camera feed in on Soren's hand. The image was grainy, then sharpened. The black ring on Soren's wrist wasn't light. It wasn't energy. It was scar tissue. It was a carving, cauterized into the flesh, inlaid with black microcircuitry that was sparking and smoking. "It is a forgery," Elias said, stepping onto the dais. She tried to force the connection. She tried to carve a door where there was no wall. Soren looked at the screen, then at her wrist. Her eyes were wild. "I am the High Curator," she screamed. "I control it." She slammed her scarred hand against the obelisk. "Obey me," she shrieked. The obelisk did not obey. It rejected. A pulse of pure white rejection slammed into Soren. It wasn't the warm, violet greeting Elias had felt. It was a static shock of cosmic proportions. The microcircuitry in Soren's arm overloaded. The fake mark caught fire. Soren didn't scream in pain. She screamed in absolute, crushing humiliation. She was thrown backward, clutching her smoking wrist, collapsing onto the white stone. The crowd watched in horror. The High Curator, the Golden Savior, was writhing on the ground, burned by the very God she claimed to speak for. Silence fell over the plaza. The music finally stopped. Elias stood alone before the obelisk. He looked at the black stone. It was towering, silent and terrifying. It waited. He looked back at Lyra. She stood 10 feet away. She took off her helmet. Her hair spilled out, silver white against the bronze armor. Her face was bruised, tired, and beautiful. She didn't tell him what to do. She didn't order him. She just nodded. Once. "I trust you. I am with you." Elias turned back to the monument. He took a breath. He didn't stumble this time. He didn't fall. He raised his hand. He placed his palm flat against the cold surface. Hello, he thought. The obelisk didn't just wake up, it roared. The glyphs didn't just ignite, they erupted. A storm of violet symbols peeled off the surface of the stone and expanded outward, wrapping the entire plaza in a swirling cyclone of light. It was beautiful and overwhelming. Then came the truth protocol. It wasn't a broadcast on a screen. It was a broadcast in the soul. Every mind in the plaza, every diplomat, every guard, every citizen suddenly knew. They didn't just see the corruption, they felt it. They felt the greed of the counselors who stole famine relief funds. They felt the cold calculation of the generals who ordered border skirmishes to boost weapon stocks. They felt the fear of the archivists who were silenced. It was uneditable. It was undeniable. It was the raw, unfiltered history of the last 400 years, downloaded into the collective consciousness of the city in a single heartbeat. Council elites in the VIP boxes screamed, clutching their heads, trying to claw the truth out of their minds. They punched override codes into their tablets, trying to shut down the obelisk. The obelisk turned their tablets to dust. The plastic and metal simply disintegrated in their hands. Blowing away on the wind of the energy storm, the truth could not be turned off. On the stage, chaos broke loose. Soren, clutching her burned arm, scrambled to her feet. Her eyes were voids of madness. She saw her empire crumbling in the eyes of her subjects. She saw the cause. She pulled a kinetic pistol from her robes. "Elias!" Lyra shouted. She moved to intercept, but she was too far away. Soren raised the gun. She didn't aim at Elias. She aimed at Lyra. "If I can't have it," Soren screamed, "you won't have him." She fired. The bullet was a hypervelocity slug. It should have torn through Lyra's armor like paper. Elias saw the muzzle flash. He didn't think. He didn't calculate. He just felt a surge of pure, terrified protectiveness. No. He reached out, not toward the obelisk, but toward Lyra. The obelisk responded. The violet light swirling around the plaza snapped into focus. It condensed into a wall of solid force between Lyra and the bullet. The slug hit the barrier and stopped dead. It hovered there for a second, caught in a web of purple lightning, before dropping harmlessly to the ground. Elias stood with his hand outstretched, his chest heaving. The shield shimmered and faded. The obelisk had protected her, because he wanted it to. Soren stared at the bullet on the ground. She stared at Elias. "Impossible," she whispered. "It is a machine. It does not care. It cares about intent," Elias said, his voice hard. "And your intent is rotten." Soren raised the gun again, screaming a wordless cry of rage. Lyra was faster. She lunged forward, closing the distance in 2 strides. She didn't draw her sword. She grabbed Soren's wrist, the burned one, and twisted. Soren shrieked, dropping the gun. Lyra swept Soren's legs, slamming the High Curator onto the stone dais. She pinned her there, a knee in her chest. Lyra grabbed the collar of Soren's robes. "Do it!" Soren spat, baring her teeth. "Kill me! Make me a martyr!" Lyra looked down at her. She looked at the woman who had manipulated the galaxy, who had tried to execute an innocent man, who had tried to turn history into a weapon. Lyra's hand hovered over her dagger. The crowd watched. Elias watched. Lyra let go of the dagger. She reached up and tapped her comms bead. "Jax," she said, her voice echoing across the silent plaza. "Are the cameras still rolling?" "Every single one," Jax replied. "Good," Lyra said. She looked directly into the nearest drone camera. "This is not a martyrdom," she said clearly. "This is an arrest. High Curator Soren Kale is detained for treason, embezzlement, and crimes against the Concord. She will not die today. She will stand trial, and she will do it in a room with glass walls, where everyone can see her. She hauled Soren to her feet, stripping the golden robes from her shoulders to reveal the blackened counterfeit mark beneath. "Take her," Lyra ordered the guards. The guards hesitated for only a second. Then, shamed by the truth in their own minds and awed by the envoy's resolve, they stepped forward. They shackled Soren Kale as they dragged her away, screaming curses at the sky. The cyclone of glyphs began to slow. The light settled. The truth protocol faded from the minds of the crowd, leaving behind the heavy, somber weight of knowledge. Elias and Lyra were left standing alone on the dais. The adrenaline crashed. Elias's knees buckled. Lyra caught him. She wrapped an arm around his waist, holding him up. They stood back to back, facing the crowd, but their attention was entirely on each other. Their hands found each other in the space between them, fingers laced together. It wasn't a triumphant pose. It was a support structure. "You okay?" Lyra whispered. "No," Elias whispered back. "I think I'm going to pass out." "Don't you dare," Lyra said. "We have to look heroic for at least 5 more minutes." The ground beneath them shuddered one last time. The obelisk changed. At the base of the monolith, where the stone met the dais, a hairline crack appeared. It traced a perfect rectangle. The stone hissed. A section of the black rock, 10 feet tall, slid inward and then to the side. A doorway. It revealed a passage leading into the heart of the obelisk. Inside, there was no darkness. There was a soft white light, humming with a sound that felt like a question. The crowd murmured, stepping back in awe. Elias looked at the door. He felt the pull again. Not a drag this time, but an invitation. "Complete the cycle," the voice in his head said. "Activation is incomplete." He looked at Lyra. "It wants me to go in," he said. Lyra looked at the dark interior. "If you go in there," she said, her voice tight, "you might change. It might rewrite you." Elias squeezed her hand. "I know," he said. "But if I don't, nothing changes out here. The truth is out, but the system is still broken. Someone has to fix the settings." He looked at her, his brown eyes clear and steady. "Wait for me?" Lyra hesitated. She looked at the open door, the unknown variable that could swallow him whole. Then she looked at the mark on his wrist, the band of night that had saved her life. She brought his hand to her lips and kissed the knuckles. "Always," she said. Elias released her hand. He stepped away from her warmth, away from the plaza, and walked toward the open door of the obelisk. He paused at the threshold. He didn't look back. He stepped inside. The stone door slid shut behind him, sealing him in with the silence and the light. The stone door hissed, the gap narrowing to a sliver of light against the encroaching dark. Elias Rook stood inside the chamber, the silence of the obelisk pressing against his eardrums. He turned, watching the final seal engage, accepting that he was alone. Then a hand jammed into the closing gap. It was a bronze gauntlet, battered and scorched. Sparks flew as the stone ground against the metal, the safety mechanisms of the ancient door screeching in protest. Elias gasped, rushing forward. "Lyra!" The door retracted a fraction, sensing the obstruction. Lyra Vare squeezed through the opening, tumbling onto the black glass floor. She rolled, coming up to a crouch, her chest heaving, her ceremonial armor scraped and dented. The door slammed shut behind her, sealing them in with a finality that vibrated through the floor. Elias grabbed her shoulders, hauling her up. "You were supposed to wait." Lyra looked at him, wiping a smear of soot from her cheek. Her eyes were fierce, the adrenaline of the plaza still burning in them. "You have a terrible habit of walking into rooms without an exit strategy," she said, her voice echoing in the vast space. I am here to ensure you do not do something noble and stupid. Elias looked at her, and the tension in his chest unspooled. He wasn't alone. Then you are going to hate this, Elias said. Look, he pointed into the dark. They were not in a room. They were standing on a floating platform of obsidian, suspended in a void that seemed to have no ceiling and no floor. Spiraling upward and downward into infinity were steps made of floating glass, illuminated by a pulsing, violet luminescence. It was a spiral of history, a double helix of memory. In the center of the spiral, a core hummed. It was not a machine. It looked like a column of liquid light, thick and slow, beating with a rhythm that matched the mark on Elias's wrist. The obelisk, Lyra whispered. It is not hollow. It is full of time. Elias finished. He stepped toward the edge of the platform. The floating steps drifted closer, assembling themselves into a path at his approach. We have to climb, he said. The control interface is at the nexus. I can feel it. As they ascended the spiral, the outside world felt a million light years away. But it wasn't. Outside, in the plaza of the Ascendant, the silence had shattered. The revelation of the Truth Protocol had broken the spell of the Concord, but it had not fixed the peace. As Soren Kale was dragged away, the vacuum of power she left behind sucked the air out of the city. Factions formed instantly. The High Curator's personal guard, loyal to the paycheck if not the ideology, secured the government district, threatening to glass the plaza if their commander was not released. The local militia, emboldened by the truth, leveled their weapons at the guards. Ambassador Harrow, sweating through his dress uniform, stood behind a barricade of overturned tables. We need to leave, his aides screamed over the roar of a riot drone. They are going to blame us for the chaos. No, Harrow said, surprising himself. He looked at the closed door of the obelisk. We ran away for 50 years. Today, we stay. Get the megaphone. Inside the monument, the ascent was grueling. The gravity shifted with every step, sometimes pressing them down, sometimes making them light as dust. A voice threaded through the air. It was the witness, projected from the core itself. The activation is prepared. Seed bearer. The network is ready to realign. Elias paused on a step, looking into the column of light. What does that mean? Realign? It means connection, the witness said. The obelisk is not just a transmitter. It is a bridge. When you complete the circuit, the jump gates will stabilize. The trade routes will open. The hidden archives of every council world will be unsealed. The truth you showed the plaza will be shown to every sentient being in the galaxy. Lyra looked at the core. That is total destabilization. Economies will collapse. Governments will fall. If everyone knows everything at once, it will be anarchy. Yes. The witness agreed. Truth is a solvent. It dissolves illusions. The Concord is built on illusions. It will fall. Elias looked at his hand. He could feel the power of the network waiting for him. It was immense. With a thought, he could open the gates. With a thought, he could close them. I can control it, Elias said, his voice taking on a strange, distant echo. I can filter the release. I can make them stop fighting. Lyra stopped climbing. She turned to look at him. Elias? Elias didn't look at her. He was staring at the light. If I control the flow, I can force a ceasefire. I can lock the weapons of the loyalist fleets. I can make them listen. That is domination, Lyra said sharply. It's peace, Elias argued, turning to her. His eyes were reflecting the violet core, drowning out the brown. They only listen when you have a weapon. Lyra, you said that yourself? The universe doesn't care about nice. It cares about power. If I don't force them to stop, they'll burn the city down. He took a step toward the core. The light flared, eager for his command. Elias! Lyra grabbed his arm. The contact sizzled, the energy of the obelisk reacting to her touch. She didn't let go. Look at me, she commanded. Not at the light, at me. Elias blinked, the violet haze receding slightly. He looked at her. You are afraid, Lyra said, her voice steady. You are afraid that if you are just Elias Rook, the technician, no one will respect you. You think you need to be a god to be safe. I'm tired of being small, Elias whispered. I'm tired of Earth being the joke. You were never small, Lyra said. In the plaza, when the bullet came for me, did you use the obelisk to kill Soren? No, Elias said. Did you use it to crush her? No. You used it to shield, Lyra said. You used it to protect. That is why the obelisk answered you. Not because you are powerful, but because you are kind. She squeezed his arm. If you force peace, Elias, you become Soren. You just become a tyrant with better intentions. And I will not follow a tyrant. Elias stared at her. The temptation of the light, the easy, intoxicating ability to fix everything with a snap of his fingers, warred with the truth in her eyes. He looked at his hand. He lowered it. You're right, he said, his voice shaking. You're right. I almost... Warning. The witness's voice cut in, sharp and urgent. Structural integrity compromised. External sabotage detected. The tower of glass shuddered violently. A boom echoed from far below, vibrating up the spiral. What was that? Elias yelled. The Loyalists, the witness said. They have breached the sub-level reactor cooling systems. They are initiating a thermal overload. They intend to detonate the obelisk from the root. They are trying to blow it up? Lyra asked. With us inside, they would rather destroy history than face it, the witness replied. Collapse is imminent in 4 minutes. The geometry of the room screamed. The floating steps fractured. The platform they were standing on tilted 40 degrees. The core turned a violent, angry red. We have to reach the Nexus, Elias shouted. If I can activate the full network, I can vent the reactor energy into the jump gates. They scrambled up the tilting steps, but the obelisk was panicking. The architecture was reacting to the fear of the machine intelligence. A wall of black glass slammed down in front of them, blocking the path. It's a dead end, Lyra yelled. No, Elias said, pressing his hands against the glass. It's not a wall. It's a reaction. The obelisk is testing us. It's a mirror system. Panic creates traps. He looked at Lyra. We have to be calm. We have to be honest. It opens for truth. The floor beneath them began to dissolve into mist. Honest about what? Lyra cried, gripping the edge of a dissolving step. About why we are here, Elias shouted. He closed his eyes. I am terrified, he yelled at the wall. I am terrified that I am not enough. I am afraid that I will be used until there is nothing left of me. The wall shuddered. It became translucent. Your turn, Elias yelled. Lyra looked at the abyss opening beneath her feet. She looked at the man holding on to her. She had spent a lifetime building walls. Now she had to break one. I am afraid that if I love you, I will be weak, she screamed, the confession tearing out of her throat. I am afraid that I will lose the edge that keeps me alive. I am afraid of being soft. The wall shattered. It didn't break into shards, it burst into light, reforming into a bridge that arched over the gap, leading directly to the Nexus. Run! Elias shouted. They sprinted across the bridge of light. The red alert sirens of the reactor were screaming in the distance. A dull roar that shook the bones. They reached the Nexus. It was a small, circular platform at the very top of the spiral. In the center was a pedestal with a hand-shaped indentation. Elias rushed to it. He raised his hand. "Wait," he said, stopping. He looked at the pedestal. It wasn't just a switch. It was a circuit. It required a complete connection. "It's too much," Elias said. "The energy, venting a reactor overload while opening a galactic network. It will burn me out. It needs a ground." He looked at Lyra. "I can't do it alone," he said. "Not this time." Lyra stepped up beside him. She didn't hesitate. She didn't ask about the survival rates. She didn't calculate the political fallout. "Then we do it together," she said. "How?" Elias asked. "You don't have the mark." Lyra took his left hand, the one with the mark, in her right hand. She interlaced their fingers. "We are not separate," she said. "Not anymore." She looked him in the eyes. Her face was open, stripped of all artifice. "Stand with me." Elias nodded. "Stand with me." He placed his right hand on the pedestal. Lyra placed her left hand on top of his. They completed the circuit. It wasn't a spark. It was a supernova. The energy of the overloading reactor surged up from the roots of the city, rushing toward the obelisk. But instead of exploding, it hit the conduit of their joined will. Elias screamed as the power hit him. It felt like being unmade. It felt like fire pouring through his veins, but Lyra was there. He felt her hand gripping his. He felt her grounding him. She was the anchor. She was the cool, sharp iron that held the fire in place. She took the overflow, the pain, the fear, and she held it. They pressed their foreheads together, their bodies shaking with the force of the transmission. They breathed the same air. It wasn't just chemistry, it was alchemy. The obelisk stabilized. The red light of the core bleached into a blinding, pure white. The monument accepted the choice. It accepted the partnership. Activation complete. The witness whispered. Charter reset initiated. The energy blasted upward, shooting out of the tip of the obelisk and punching a hole through the atmosphere. The beam hit the orbital blockade. It didn't destroy the ships. It passed through them. Every screen on every bridge, every data pad in every pocket, every holographic billboard on every world in the Concord turned white. Then, the text began to scroll. It wasn't a manifesto. It was a ledger. It started with the Vaysol crisis. It showed the orders Soren had signed. It showed the bribes paid to the captains of the blockade. Then it went wider. It showed the hidden accounts where famine relief for the Outer Rim had been diverted to build private palaces. It showed the secret treaties that kept Earth poor and the inner worlds rich. It was the ultimate transparency. The obelisk had unlocked the encryption of the entire civilization. On the surface, the riot stopped. The loyalist soldiers lowered their weapons, staring at their helmet displays, reading the orders that proved their commanders viewed them as expendable meat. Soren Kale, sitting in the back of a secure transport vehicle, watched the screen of her cuffs light up. She saw her entire life's work, every lie, every maneuver laid bare. She didn't scream this time. She just slumped back, small and defeated. The reactor overload dissipated. The energy harmlessly shunted into powering the opening of the dormant jump gates. Inside the obelisk, the light faded. Elias and Lyra collapsed onto the platform. They lay there for a long time, gasping for air, their hands still clasped. Did we win? Elias wheezed. Lyra rolled onto her back, looking up at the now calm core. I don't know if we won, she said, her voice raspy. But we definitely broke it. Elias laughed. It was a weak, breathless sound. Breaking things is an Earth specialty. Lyra turned her head to look at him. She reached out and brushed a strand of hair from his forehead. You are still here, she whispered. You didn't burn out. You held on, Elias said. Lyra smiled. It was a real smile, soft and tired. I told you, she said. Always. The days that followed were not easy. There was no parade. There was only the messy, loud, complicated work of rebuilding a reality that had been shattered. The Concorde did not collapse, but it changed. The transparency was painful. Governments fell in hours as their populations read the ledgers. Corporations dissolved as their illegal assets were frozen and redirected to the worlds they had exploited. It was chaotic. It was terrifying. But it was honest. 3 weeks later, the great hall of the council was packed, but the mood was different. The golden banners were gone, replaced by simple screens displaying the ongoing data from the Obelisk. Elias stood at the podium. He wasn't wearing ceremonial robes. He was wearing a simple gray suit, though this one actually fit. The interim council had offered him everything: the title of High Custodian, the throne of Vaisol, the command of the fleet. Elias looked at the faces in the hall. He looked at the camera drones. "I am not your king," Elias said into the microphone. "I am not your savior. I am an engineer. I fix connections." He gestured to the obelisk visible through the great window behind him. "The network is open. The truth is available. But the obelisk won't make decisions for you. It won't tell you what is right. It will only tell you what is true. You have to do the rest." He looked at the datapad in front of him. "I propose a stewardship, a rotating council of every member species, selected by lottery, not by wealth. No one holds power for more than one cycle. No one hides their ledger." He paused. "And as for me, I resign." The hall erupted in murmurs. "I am leaving the interface open," Elias said, "but I am stepping away from the controls. Because the only way to trust power is to see someone give it up." He walked off the stage. Lyra was waiting for him in the wings. She was no longer wearing the silver robes of an envoy. She wore a dark, practical tunic and trousers. She looked less like a statue and more like a woman who was ready to work. "That was short," she noted. "I kept it brief," Elias said, loosening his tie. "Did they buy it?" "They are confused," Lyra said. "They are terrified, but they are listening. It is a start." "And you?" Elias asked. "How did the resignation go?" Lyra smirked. "My house was horrified. My mother threatened to disown me. It was delightful." She handed him a tablet. "I have already drafted the charter for the new oversight coalition. Independent auditors, civilians, no politicians. I will need a co-chair who understands how to read ancient data structures." Elias took the tablet. "Are you offering me a job?" "I am offering you a headache," Lyra said. "Long hours, terrible pay, constant arguments." Elias grinned. He stepped closer to her. "Will there be tea?" Lyra stepped into his space. She didn't hesitate anymore. "Only if you fix the machine." The evening air on the balcony was cool, smelling of the metallic desert and the ozone of the city shields. The crater below was no longer a fortress. It was a park. The walls had been taken down. The obelisk stood in the center, pulsing with a gentle white light that illuminated the families walking in the gardens below. Elias leaned against the railing, watching the lights. "It's strange," he said. "It's so quiet now." Lyra stood beside him, her shoulder brushing his. "The noise was the lies," she said. "Truth is quiet." She looked at him. He looked different. The stress lines around his eyes were still there, but the shadow was gone. The mark on his wrist was faint, a silver scar rather than a shackle of night. "You know," Lyra said, swirling her glass of wine, "there is a theory among my people. We believe that chaos is a necessary element of evolution. We call it the disaster key." Elias raised an eyebrow. "Are you calling me a disaster?" "I am calling humans a disaster," Lyra corrected. "You are loud. You are messy. You break things just to see how they work. You are statistically likely to cause an explosion wherever you go. She turned to face him, resting her hip against the railing. But sometimes, Lyra said softly, the explosion clears the path. Elias looked at her. He thought about the journey, the fear in the plaza, the cold of the desert, the heat of the core. He reached out and took her hand. His fingers traced the faint white scar of the sigil on her shoulder through her shirt. If I'm the disaster, Elias said, looking into her black eyes, then what are you? Lyra smiled. It was the smile he had seen in the desert. The real one. Me? She said. I am the cleanup crew. Elias laughed. He pulled her closer. She came willingly, resting her forehead against his. You're my favorite consequence, he whispered. Lyra kissed him. It was a promise, sealed in the quiet air of a new world. Below them, the obelisk hummed. It was no longer a judge. It was no longer a weapon. It was just a stone, standing witness to the stars. The obelisk was no longer silent, because someone finally touched it with the right kind of courage.